Salutations, ladies and gentlemen. It is such a great honor and pleasure to be speaking at the Freedom Under Natural Law Conference again. I want to give a shout out to all the organizers for all of their hard work, their due diligence, and their consistency in presenting and keeping this conference alive and keeping it going. I know personally how hard that can be and how much work it takes to actually organize these types of events. And I'd also like to thank everybody who is participating and viewing, and I hope that all of you are finding a plethora, a gold mine to say, of great knowledge and insight into these topics. My name is Brandon Martin, and I am the founder of the S.E.E.D Truth Academy and the S.E.E.D Conference. And today I'm going to be speaking on a controversial topic, specifically in the realms of the occult, which happens to be something very personal to me and one of my, I would say at this point, expertise with all the research and personal experience that I've had. My presentation title is Amor est lex, Amor sub Voluntate. Now, for those who do not know this, this means love is the law, love under will. This will be an esoteric initiation of love, will, and law. So without further ado, let's get right into the topics. First, I'm going to be starting out with many caveats. The first caveat is I am not asking anybody to just believe me, and I cannot cover all the information about Thelema in one setting. You have to do your own due diligence into these topics. Now we're going to get into some caveats about Thelema, because this topic can become very heated and emotionally triggering for some. Thelema, first of all, is not a religion of belief or system of worship. The truth about Thelema does not require belief, faith, or devotion to gods, spirits, or especially to Aleister Crowley, or Crowley. Some people pronounce it differently. This will not be about Crowley himself or Crowley himself. Aleister Crowley is not the authority, prophet, or pope of Thelema. He even says this himself in some of his texts. Crowley articulated some of the system, but Thelema explicitly rejects appeal to authority and has diverse sources and people who were and are part of its evolution and creation. Aleister Crowley is treated here as one of the sources and systemizers, not as an infallible authority. And so when we're talking about this topic, especially in the realms of the occult, people really want to focus on the hamartias, the personal flaws of individuals who happen to either be part of the foundation of that occult system or is just affiliated with that occult practice or teachings. And this, to me, can be valuable in certain areas depending on the goal that you're actually having. My goal is to study the esoteric mystery traditions and to find truth and things that are models and methods to help align one's spirit and raise one's spirit into a higher plane of existence and expand consciousness, and ultimately to bring freedom. That's what we're really trying to do here, to bring liberation for all beings. And so there are Thelemites, and then there are people who worship Crowley. So Crowley was a very flawed individual, just like all of us. And just with all my information, I do not ask people to live like me. I am fallible. I have my own flaws. I am a human being. The process of awakening, the process of enlightenment, is to work out these flaws in yourself and to persevere in the work on yourself. So this presentation is not at all to advocate to live like Crowley, or doing as Crowley did, or others who did, meaning the others who followed him. His/their personal life, flaws, and opinions are not doctrines or something to be enshrined. They are analytically separable from the conceptual structure of thelema itself. So it's important to be able to compartmentalize these two things. Of course, they are related at some level, but for the maximum efficiency of gaining knowledge for this model, this occult teaching, it's important to understand that the teachings themselves on whether or not they're true or not is more important than focusing on the flaws of the individual. Crowley does not equal thelema. That is very important to understand. This is something else as well. Thelema is not solely about sex magic. Sexual symbolism and practice are one aspect, but not the core of thelema. Reducing thelema to solely sex magic is a misunderstanding popularized by sensationalism and news media, Hollywood, forums. Is it a part of it? Yes, just like any magical order. Sex is a very sacred act, and we will talk about that later. But that is not the sole meaning or purpose of thelema. And a lot of people see sexual symbolism and they immediately get turned off, usually because they have some sort of puritanical mindset, some sort of puritanical program, and a lack of understanding about what it actually means, the context of that sexual symbolism. Thelema is not a shortcut to enlightenment. This is very crucial to understand. There are no shortcuts to enlightenment on this journey, and anyone telling you such is a charlatan. Thelema does not promise instant awakening, knowledge, or power. It demands discipline, self-honesty, self-mastery, ego disillusion, and long-term inner work, often uncomfortable and destabilizing for a time. I am not claiming that thelema is the exclusive path for the spiritual journey. In fact, I advocate for an eclectic study of all the occult traditions and mystery schools. Thelema has a particular disposition towards autonomy, symbolism, and self-directed inquiry, which may not be applicable or appealing to all individuals. I am not advocating for anyone to join any clandestine or secret order or society. That is very important to understand here. This is not an advocation or a promotion to go out and join a lodge or join an order or get involved in any secret society at all. Another thing here is that I will not be covering the conspiracies or sensational drama circling around thelema. This is specifically about the root teachings of thelema. Now, with all that being said, let's get right into the work because I have a lot of stuff to cover here. To understand thelema, you're going to have some prerequisite knowledge. Knowledge of Kabbalah, you're going to have to understand Freemasonry, and specifically the Tarot. These are the three foundations, I would say. And ultimately, these are mainly the three most important mystery traditions. And I would put Freemasonry at the forefront of all three of these. But there is quite a lot of other things that you need. There's quite a lot of other knowledge that comes with understanding thelema. And I would say that this is a short but concise list that could aid in a student if they wish to fully get the maximum knowledge from thelema. You're going to need to know about Hermeticism. You're going to need to study alchemy, Rosicrucianism, the Golden Dawn, Gnosticism, astrotheology, astronomy, and astrology. You're going to need to study comparative religion. You're going to need to have some basis of world religions, specifically the big three. You're going to have some historical founding, some historical knowledge, meaning world history. You're definitely going to need some Eastern and Western philosophy and theology. You're going to need some esoteric knowledge, which all this kind of covers, but numerology, sacred geometry, gematria, things like the Pythagorean theorem. You're going to need to have some basic understanding of psychology and physiology. You're definitely going to need, especially for Thelema, to understand Eastern meditation and yoga. And you're also going to need, if not equally as much for meditation and yoga, understanding ritual magic, meaning Solomonic, Enochian, and others. And I would say that understanding shamanism and psychedelics is crucial as well, and both dark and light occultism and esotericism, which kind of is covered in all this. So these are the things that I would say you're going to need to look into to fully extrapolate the most meaning and most value out of the Thelemic tradition. So I always start out with this. Most of you already know this, but if you don't, this will be a good introduction. So what is the occult? A lot of people have a very negative view of the occult. Well, the word occult is derived from the Latin adjective occultus, meaning hidden from sight, which comes from the Latin verb occultare, to hide, to conceal, to keep secret. Both are in turn derived from the Latin noun oculus, meaning eye. Occult knowledge constitutes both the knowledge of the workings of the human psyche, meaning consciousness, and the knowledge of natural law, both the seen physical laws and unseen spiritual laws or metaphysical laws. Very crucial to understand that. And before I read this slide, if you're more interested in a deeper dive on the definitions of this, I would highly recommend checking out my work or Mark Passio's work or Nate Cap's work from the Cubbyhole, from What on Earth is Happening. So Mark's from What on Earth is Happening. Everybody knows that at this point. Nate Cap's from the Cubbyhole podcast. I would say those are some good sources. You know, there's a lot of great sources out there on this at this point. So why people won't study the occult? I narrowed this down into 3 points. 1, conditioning and fear programming. From childhood, most people are trained to associate occult solely with evil, chaos, violence, superstition, or danger. This has been done through many different means, such as Hollywood media, dogmatic religions, public schools, and social engineering. All of these things create a web of conditioning. So it's not just one source. It's not just because of the religious dogma, though you could probably sum it all up into that category ultimately. But there are many different varying factors of why this program runs in people's minds. And I just call it fear programming and conditioned fear programming. So the second thing is social risk and ostracism. Studying the occult places one outside the collective herd mindset, thus resulting in ridicule, harassment, slander, and potential violence. People would rather be wrong with a group than right and alone in truth. It's very important to understand. Studying the occult puts you in a place where a lot of people are going to shun you, ostracize you from social groups, unless they're already interested in that knowledge. The third one is ignorance, apathy, and laziness. These are ultimately the killers of freedom and the killers of self-improvement. The willful rejection of occult knowledge when in the presence of it. Lack of true care, or lack of true care for truth, I should say. Perceived lack of purpose and meaning, which is telos in philosophy. And lack of will. We're going to be talking about a lot of these things here. And to symbolize all this, I have an initiate up here, a Masonic initiate with the blindfold on the checkered board floor, symbolically, saying that they still have not raised and climbed Jacob's ladder into a higher state of understanding. They have not entered the middle chamber of understanding themselves, their psyche, doing their shadow work, understanding what true care actually is. And They're still in this dualism of not understanding right from wrong, moral relativism. In fact, a lot of them don't even believe in right and wrong. They're completely, utterly destroyed, and they don't have any foundational, healthy worldview. We're going to talk about worldviews a little bit too. One of the main things, and has been one of my main goals, is to remove the stigma around the occult. Though some occultists have argued that that stigma is a good thing. I don't think it is, because the knowledge that is held within the occult models is crucial for humanity to free itself from the current states of tyranny and bondage. So I don't take that approach anymore. I'm very egalitarian with this information. But throughout the history, it is true, just like I said before, there has been a lot of violence that has taken place for those who have practiced the occult or studied it. They didn't even have to practice. All they had to do was study it. The occult has been systematically bastardized and marginalized by authorities and culture alike. Once a body of knowledge devoted to self-mastery, symbolism, natural law, and the hidden structures of reality, it was reframed as superstition, magic tricks, and irrationality, stripped of its practical and ethical power. Authorities such as the churches, states, and later modern institutions labeled it dangerous, evil, or corrupting, not because it harmed anybody, but because it revealed truths that undermine obedience and the institutions themselves, exposing illegitimate power and demanding personal responsibility. Over time, the genuine path of initiation was replaced with spectacle, shallow mysticism, and new agey fluff, leaving most people blind to the occult's original purpose: to awaken the individual and free them from dependence on external authority. Those possessing occult knowledge were and are viewed as a threat to the established religious or political order. This is because such knowledge challenges the orthodox doctrines and authoritarian structures. As a result, heresy hunters, being order followers, seek to eradicate these individuals or groups, believing that by doing so, they can maintain control and suppress any potential challenges to the prevailing religious or political ideologies. I know that was a mouthful. I tend to have very wordy slides, by the way. If I try to make it as concise and, detailed as possible, but also cutting through the crap without losing any of its potency, right? So here he is, the infamous Aleister Crowley. Yes, I will be using some statements from him and some of his sources, like I said at the beginning. He goes on to say, which is a very powerful quote and pertains to what we're going to be talking about and this issue about how people think about occult knowledge. The sin which is unpardonable is knowingly and willfully to reject truth, to fear knowledge, lest that knowledge pander not to thy prejudices. This is ultimately, when it comes down to it, if there is such a thing as this idea of sin, which really is just violations of other people's liberties, but if there is a sin to the self, to you, it is to willfully reject truth. He said it, and it is true. This is true. And yes, people who fall from the path, and yes, people who have done bad things in the world can speak truth. Hitler could speak a truth to you. And if I say that is true, it doesn't mean I support Hitler. Very two different things. I support the truth, not Hitler. So we're going to be talking about magic and sorcery. Mainly, we're going to be talking about magic. But what is the definition? What is magic itself? And I like to put these into two categories, just like many other people. I've always thought this way ever since I was a kid. Even before I came across Mark's work, I had an intuitive understanding that there was a definitive difference between magic and sorcery, though it gets blurred in things like D&D and fantasy and all this stuff, right? So let's define sorcery first. Sorcery, the craft or art of manipulating change to occur in accordance with one's selfish will, meaning the lowercase will. We're going to be talking a lot about will. And magic, the craft or art of influencing change to occur in accordance with the higher will. Now, I'm not going to tell you what that means here right now, but we will get into the difference between the higher will and the lowercase will. And I mean, it says it right here. Anybody with any faculties of reason can see that selfish will, meaning you're only for yourself and you care not what happens to other people or what you do upon other people, is a very negative and very bad mindset to have. And ultimately, it is what causes violence because people only care about themselves. There's a lot of reasons for that, but selfishness is a big part of it. And I really like this image. I'm not sure who did this art. I found it online, but it's just really, really good, I think. I really enjoyed this image. It was hard for me to find a good image for this specific one. You know, I before I did an angel and a demon, and I didn't really like that, and because it was too religious-y, and but ultimately I think that this image kind of hits it, you know, because occult knowledge is a tool and it can be used both for negative things and positive things. Our job is to use that knowledge for positive stuff, which I have defined ad infinitum. Now, this is Jack Parsons. Jack Parsons has a very interesting history, but he says the true magicians have always been scientists, and science has always been the magician's best ally. Now, Jack Parsons had a very rough start in Thelema, and if anybody's interested in that, I would read Strange Angel or go and watch the show. Unfortunately, they killed it off, and you know, Mark and myself, I think we both concluded it was mainly because of what they were depicting there, and specifically the reading of Liber Oz, and we will read that here today. Jack Parsons was not a perfect individual, and he struggled staying on the path of true enlightenment. And he struggled with serving two masters. He worked for the military. He had a lot of baggage and a lot of stuff that he really couldn't overcome. He couldn't dedicate himself to the actual spiritual journey because he was still working from the lower base desires. He was still working from sorcery. So if anybody's interested in Jack Parsons' history, there's some good documentaries out there on him. I just watched one recently. It was very revealing. There's even some conspiracies that he actually, you know, was assassinated. Though it's kind of iffy. It doesn't surprise me if he was. I can't really say that he actually was. But as far as we know, there was some very suspicious things circling around his death. You can look into that if you'd like. Again, I'm not saying live like Jack Parsons, but this statement is true when it applies to occultism and magic. So whenever we imagine a cult, we usually think of ritualistic dramas where people are out in the woods sacrificing animals with their robes. I wore my robe specifically, right? I think the colors fit. I have my unicrystal hexagram on, and we will talk about that later. Yes, it is true that rituals and rites are a deep part of the occult practices. You cannot separate that. That is true. The real dark occultists of this day really are not people in the woods sacrificing animals to some entity. Really, they wear business suits and they work in the Senate. They work in the courts. They work in the banks. You know, you want to see real dark occultists? Just look at your government. You know, that's all you need to do. That's where you're going to find real dark occultists. Just look at your representatives or the representatives. because I know people here today do not accept these people as representatives for them, and you should not. But what is a ritual? A ritual is a set of actions, often ceremonial in nature, performed in a prescribed order and imbued with symbolic meaning. These actions are usually repetitive and follow specific traditions and patterns, often passed down through generations. Rituals can be found in various aspects of human life, including religious ceremonies, cultural practices, social customs, and even personal routines. In Thelema, rituals are not performed to appease external gods, obey tradition for its own sake without just or ontological cause, or submit to dogmatic authority. Rather, ritual is a deliberate technology, quote unquote technology, of consciousness as a method that works from an esoteric model by which the individual aligns thought, emotions, and actions into harmony with the true will. And this is a quote from Eliphas Levi. The forms of ritual are the alphabet of the language of the mysteries. This is also a quote from another occult author. Ritual magic is a form of deliberate psychodrama. And I think the image displays this psychodrama very accurately. Thelemic rites and rituals are mainly derived from Freemasonry. And yes, that is true. Mainly Freemasonry, Kabbalah, and Tarot. But ultimately, it's coming from Freemasonry, in my point of view. And as understood within the AA system, operate simultaneously on multiple levels of initiation. Psychologically, they function as methods of subconscious reconditioning and deliberate confrontation with the shadow, dissolving internal contradictions that obscure true will. Symbolically, they employ archetypal forms drawn from Kabbalah, Tarot, and myth, not as objects of belief, but as living formulas to be consciously assumed and integrated. Rites serve to align the individual microcosm with the macrocosmic order, establishing resonance between personal action and universal law. Each rite marks a measurable shift in awareness, discipline, and responsibility appropriate to the grade of the aspirant. And Israel Regardie, who is a very prominent figure in the Golden Dawn, states, the rituals are psychological mechanisms designed to awaken powers within the psyche. That's what it is. And it's been used by indigenous cultures. This method has been used by indigenous cultures and humanity throughout all the ages. Once we have started to implement the idea of magic and specifically started to try to influence the extant, right? These methodologies of symbolic performance and psychodramas and spiritual invocations all start to manifest in any culture, no matter what. But specifically at the origins of humanity, when you look at esoteric anthropology, we'll start to see how this, and it is true, it is in an anthropological way, a religious thought, something that is meant to bind you back to spiritual truth or truth itself, something meant to enhance not only the individual, but enhance the social group, the tribal group, or the culture itself to grow and to cultivate something. Now, obviously, there's a negative connotation to that word religion. Comes from relegulo, relegare. It can mean to buy back, to tie back from forward momentum, from growth and things like that. Or it can tie you back and anchor you and tether you to something that's important, such as truth. Obviously, it's not an avocation to get involved in institutionalized religious beliefs. And one of my favorite authors, Joseph Campbell, says, a ritual is the enactment of a myth. And by participating in the ritual, you are participating in the myth. And since myth is a projection of the depth, wisdom of the psyche, by participating in the ritual, you are being, as it were, put in accord with that wisdom, which is the wisdom that is inherent within you anyhow. And I think that kind of nails it and sums it up. So what does the word thelema actually mean? The word is a English transliteration of the Koine Greek noun, which is of the same English pronunciation, thelema, which means will, which comes from the Greek verb, thelo, which means to will, wish, want, or purpose. It constitutes an occult philosophy established by Aleister Crowley during the early 1900s. The core concepts of thelema, especially the phrase, do what thou wilt, existed before Aleister Crowley. A lot of people don't know this. Most notably in the 16th century work Gargantua and Pantagruel by Francois Rabelais. It describes the Abbey of Thelema as a satirical inversion of monastic life. The abbey has a single rule, fais ce que voudras. My French is horrible, but it means do what thou wilt in French. Rabelais used this as a humanist satire aimed at the corruption and hypocrisy of church institutions. However, the satire was not meant to mean do whatever one wants. Other writers and thinkers, such as members of the Hellfire Clubs, were also influenced by this idea before Crowley synthesized it into his own philosophy of thelema. And yes, the word is pronounced thelema in classical Greek, which ultimately just means will. But it's theta, epsilon, lambda, eta, mu, alpha. And that eta sound is where people get confused because in modern Greek, a lot of times it's translated as an E sound, a long E, E. So they would pronounce it thelema. And in fact, I'm sure you heard it on TV that pronounced that way or a movie or something like this. But in classical Greek, that's pronounced as an A sound. So it would be thelema, So yes, that is the correct pronunciation of that. And I did a lot of research on that. That's not just me saying that because somebody else said it. If you look it up, you will find that in classical Greek, you're supposed to pronounce the eta sound, A. So in thelema, we find the main symbol of the occult tradition. It's called a unicursal hexagram. This is a 6-pointed star drawn with a single continuous line. That's what unicursal means, which was popularized in modern occultism by Aleister Crowley, though its elements are much older. In fact, you may find resemblance to this with the Star of David or the Seal of Solomon, which is the upward-facing triangle and the inverted triangle overlapping each other. The traditional hexagram, two interlaced triangles, has long been symbolized as the union of opposites, the sacred masculine and sacred feminine principle. In the ancient mystery traditions, specifically, so you will find this predating, you will find this going all the way back to the stellar cults, ultimately. Unlike the traditional hexagram, which requires lifting the pen, the unicursal form is traced in one unbroken motion, symbolizing will acting without internal division. There's a lot of things it symbolizes, but that's how I think of it. Crowley's innovation can be traced to earlier mathematical curiosities and Renaissance magical diagrams, but was deliberately adopted by Crowley for the ritual of the ruby star. At the center of the unicursal hexagram, you're going to find in many depictions, sometimes you don't, but in many depictions you'll find the 5-leaf clover, which is a form of the pentagram and represents the 5 elemental powers, that of fire, water, air, earth, and quintessence being spirit. Unlike the 4-leaf clover, which represents good material fortune, so if you find a 4-leaf clover out in your yard, usually means good fortune, right? The 5-leaf is that of spiritual unity with the material, spiritual fortune, real spiritual fortune, not materialistic, not solely materialistic fortune. When it is placed upright, it means raised spirit. So when the pentagram, as shown on this with the 5-leaf clover, the 5th point is facing upright, it means raised spirit because that point, that 5th point, represents the quintessence or the essence or spirit, the essence of ourselves. And it is in full prime and in its proper role. That is crucial to understand. When inverted, it means the death of spirit. So we find this in satanic symbolism. When the pentagram is inverted, the spirit is now facing in the south rather than the north. And this means that the spirit is in the coffin, awaiting a resurrection because it is dead. It is the death of spirit. This also puts the four elements of the physical above the spiritual, which means that it is primacy on material. Astrotheologically, it relates to the waxing and waning cycles of the sun and the soul's journey. So if you think about a zodiacal circle or a zodiacal circle, and you take this, image, imagine taking a pentagram and starting it in the south, the spirit in the south, the fifth point facing directly due south, right, in the coffin. And then you spin it and you rotate it clockwise. You'll see that spirit's journey traverses through that circle. And so our goal is to raise spirit, the waxing angles, right, upward into the northern position. But obviously it is a hero's journey. So we do go back down, and then, when we go back to the coffin, our job is to resurrect the spirit when we're in the coffin. So you could say birth, and then you have growth, and then you have full adulthood, full raise, and then you have decay, and then death, and then resurrection again, right? So you can look at it that way. There's many different models for this. The main point is to understand it very simply, is that fifth point represents spirit, and when it's inverted, it means that your job is to flip it, to put it back in the north. That is your responsibility to do that. And this is why dark occultists love the inverted pentagram. And actually, inept children run around using this symbol as some form of rebellion when that's not what it really represents. It means that you're actually in ignorance, apathy, and laziness is what it really means. And it means your spiritual nature is dead. And in fact, you could even symbolize it as an atheist or a nihilist who, their spiritual aspects are, again, in the coffin, right? So yeah, very important to understand. So in Thelema, we have the book Liber al vel Legis, often referred to simply as the Book of the Law, which is a central sacred text in the occult philosophy of Thelema. Aleister Crowley claimed to have received this text through a process of automatic writing, channeling, that's what automatic writing really is, during mystical experiences with ayahuasca in Cairo, Egypt in 1904. The book comprises 3 chapters attributed to different deities: Nut, also pronounced Nuit, Hadit, and Rahor Kuit. These chapters contain cryptic and esoteric verses that often require extensive interpretation and cannot be understood without the knowledge of the occult mystery traditions. The philosophical concepts embedded in Liber al vel Legis revolve around the notion of the will, the pursuit of one's true purpose, and the relationship between the individual and the cosmic order. Very important to understand that. Israel Regardi says Thelema is a system of spiritual development and practice designed to allow an individual to attain the highest level of self-realization and spiritual attainment. Now here we go. You want to know what Thelema is? Let's hear it directly from them. Thelema, the law of liberty. Is it a religion? A philosophy? A collection of metaphysical practices? A system of postmodern ethics? That would be really bad. Decide for yourself what it is. There is religion in Thelema for those that require it. There is freedom from religion in Thelema for those that require it. The goal of Thelema, to help you realize your true will, the innermost spark of divinity inside you that holds your life's purpose on your own terms, in your own unique way, bowing down to nobody in the process. And then Crowley goes on to state, every man and every woman is a star. Every number is infinite. There is no difference. And then we have, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law at the top, and love is the law, love under will. Very important to understand. We'll be talking about that. So what does this phrase mean? Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Everybody usually just takes that phrase. Do what thou wilt is one of the most recognized tenets of Thelema, yet also one of the most misunderstood. It is misinterpreted due to his brevity and the controversial reputation of Crowley. Taken alone, the phrase is often interpreted as a license for hedonism, recklessness, self-indulgence, selfishness, carnal-based desires, rampant materialism, and out-of-balance egoism. To understand this in its correct form, it's essential to explore the tradition in full. Let me read that again. To understand this in its correct form, it is essential to explore the tradition in full. This misunderstanding persists largely because people isolate the first half of the statement while ignoring the full formulation. The full formulation, as just shown before, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. So Satanists, people who are young and inept, again, will take that first statement and run rampant with it. If you just isolate that, then yeah, it would give you some ideological justification, some romantic justification in your head to be like, oh, I can just do whatever I want. That is the whole of the law. But let's focus on another thing here. What does will mean? In Thelemic philosophy, the term will does not refer to fleeting desires or ego-driven impulses. In other words, it does not mean do whatever you want. It refers to the true will of creation and higher power. It is an individual's authentic purpose, telos. That's what telos means. And life path, the path which aligns one's own will, lowercase will. Remember, we were talking about lowercase will and highercase will. Lowercase will with the will of creation, capital highercase will of creation. The true will, when correctly understood, is the elevation of the great work in one's life above the sole purpose of personal pleasure and materialism. It is what you are here to do, okay? It is what you are here to do when illusion, fear, and dogmatic conditioning are removed. This path becomes apparent when one learns to listen to and follow the guidance of their higher self and adhere to natural law, also known as karma, cosmic law, God's law. Nowadays, I just call it law. That's all it is, just law. That's what it really is. It is the apotheosis of liberty. Apotheosis means the highest attainment, the highest thing you can attain for. Apotheosis of liberty. To follow any other path when in times of lies, fear, and slavery than the one of truth, love, and freedom is not the true will. Okay? If you are just following any other path when, we're living in a dystopia, there's lies, there's fear, there's slavery, there's violence, there's tyranny, any of this stuff. And you're just going along with it. That's not the true will. Okay, that is not the true will at all. There's nothing about that is in harmony with the true will. So Aleister Crowley himself even wrote this in Magic Without Tears. Do what thou wilt does not mean do what you like. He says it himself. People seem to forget this. It does not mean do what you like. And a person who is attaining or striving or has attained and aligned with natural law and with the true will, he's represented by the Magus card of the tarot. This is Crowley's personal deck. Okay, so he had this personally designed for Thelema and for him. And this deck is amazing. I have a personal version myself. I really love the symbolism. And we can see here in the symbolism, you have the lower base consciousness and carnal desires being represented as the ape or the monkey. And then the raised spirit, the raised man, right? You have the wings spread out wide at the top with the serpent being raised, the Kundalini serpent being raised to the pinnacle. You have the four suits of the tarot in this. There's a plethora of symbolism here, and it's rich. It's absolutely rich. So it represents the enlightened man, the one who has, done the work and is doing the work. It's not just you're done and that's it. We're going to talk about that too. Brevity and controversy. Some people mistakenly believe that Thelema promotes a moral relativism in which anything goes as long as it aligns with one's will. Again, lowercase will, right? In reality, Thelema includes ethical principles such as love is the law, love under will, which suggests that one's actions should be guided by love and harmony with objective morality and natural law. It doesn't just suggest, and I should have changed that for this. It dictates that. Okay? You can't, it's just not a suggestion. It is the dictation of that. Because the only way you can be in harmony with the true will is by following the law of love. Critics argue that do it thou wilt promotes a disregard for the well-being and rights of others. This is in fact far from the case, and only those who have not fully studied and correctly understood the teachings say this. The individual's liberties, rights, and well-being of others is of crucial importance in Thelema. Despite what others may think, it is not a license to harm or exploit other moral agents. This is David Shoemaker, and this comes from his book, The Way of the Will. I highly recommend it. I believe he is the magus of the temple currently. I know he was for a while. He states, Thelema is not a license to indulge the ego, but a demand that the ego be brought into alignment with something far deeper. A lot of people get confused with occultism. Rightfully so. There's a lot of confusing things in occultism. Thelema itself is cryptic by its very nature. People misunderstand Thelema largely because it speaks in deliberate, cryptic, paradoxical, and confrontational language that assumes philosophical and esoteric literacy, specifically symbolic literacy and correlative thinking, which many readers do not bring to it. So many people don't bring this to it. It does not explain itself gently or progressively. It assumes the student will struggle, cross-reference, and verify through due diligence, practice, and correlative thinking. Readers who approach the text as literal scripture or as a guide to self-help philosophy miss the initiatory dimensions entirely and either idolize or reject what they do not yet understand. The principles are cryptic for a reason, and that reason is unveiled as one proceeds through the method and dedicates themselves to the study. It's not an easy path. It's hard work to do this work, to understand, to unveil occultism. It's not something that you can just pick up and read and just immediately grasp, especially if you've been conditioned to only think with the left brain, especially if you don't have symbolic literacy. You have to increase the mental faculties to be able to understand occultism. You have pretty much, if we want to put it in video game terms, you got to increase your experience level. You know, you got to dive in and you got to struggle with it. You know I've struggled. I've struggled a lot understanding this stuff. I still struggle to this day. I read stuff and I'm like, what are they talking about? But you have to work on it. That's the point. There's no way out of this mess without understanding the occult. And anybody who says that we're going to get out of this mess by not understanding the occult is a complete, absolute imbecile. Absolutely. Just a dunce. You're not getting out of it. Because the occult is all-encompassing for all hidden knowledge. It's not just the knowledge that the elite keeps from you. You know, I talk about this in a lot of my other work. You know, nature itself, the material realm is occulted by its very nature. You know, the tree doesn't come to you and just tell you how it works. You know, this is not just something handed to you on a silver platter and you just have some, innate gift for it. You might be more skilled than others with correlative thinking. You might have higher intelligence levels. That's true, but there's still work to be put into it. You know, really, I say there's no prodigies of the occult, because even a prodigy, even if you're born with an aptitude for revealing these things, if you don't work on it, you lose it. It's just the same with everybody. If you have like some biological and maybe consciousness ability and experience, the experience might not even be there, but just the aptitude for it, right? To pick up on it intuitively, right? Like picking up a guitar when you're really young, or drumming, as a child, and you got it, or playing a piano. If you don't work on those things, you're going to lose them. You're not just going to be gifted for the rest of your life with that. I hear people say this stuff all the time, and they don't understand. People who are skilled worked at it. We work at it. That's the thing. That's why I know the things I do, because I work at them. I dedicate my time. I don't, there's a part of me that really enjoys understanding the occult stuff, but when it comes to like trying to set humanity free, I don't want to be doing that. None of us want to be here doing this, really. We would all be wanting to do our own things, We'll talk about a little bit of that later. I don't want to get too much on a tangent here. We're going to take a look at the logos and telos. Logos is the Greek term which means word, reason, and or principle. And in philosophical and mystical context, it refers to the rational organizing principle underlying the cosmos from a divine mind. It represents both the structural intelligence of reality and the monad intelligence, meaning your intelligence. A deficiency of logos is a failure of the integration of the nature of mind. The process of true will presupposes the logos. Logos operates as a mediating and orderly principle that renders will epistemically accessible and practical. In the lack of this, we have no means for the process at all. The necessity of logos is a foundation of epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics. You can't reason or rationalize any metaphysical claims. You can't rationalize whether the scopes of knowledge and whether knowledge exists or not. And you can't rationalize right from wrong behavior. You can't understand anything if you do not have the faculty of logos. So in epistemology, logos provides the criteria for justified true knowledge or justified knowledge. Without it, claims to knowledge completely collapse. You can't make any claims from that. In metaphysics, logos functions as the principle of intelligibility that allows reality to be articulated in structure, non-contradictory terms. Without rational ordering, metaphysical claims become indistinguishable from any just assertion, just any random assertion. It can be anything it is. And this has to do with the principle of induction as well, that nature has a regularity over time, that you can correlate something that has happened to something that is currently happening and something that could happen. Okay. And then this also applies to ethics as well. So logos grounds the capacity to distinguish between aligned and misaligned actions of morality, obviously, enabling the practitioner to differentiate authentic expressions of will from compulsory or ego-driven behavior. So you have to have the logos in all this. Now, the lack of telos is extremely important. Usually, if you have the lack of this, you end up as a nihilist. So telos is the Greek philosophical term meaning end, purpose, or goal. Has a connection to eschatology as well, but we're not going to get into that here. This is central to Aristotle's ideas that everything has a final cause or inherent aim, forming the root of teleology, the understanding that existence is not just random motion, right? Not just matter and molecules just bouncing into each other, which is a materialistic standpoint. The rejection of telos is the murder of the understanding of purpose and the true will. You can't strive for the true will and align with the true will if you do not understand telos. It is philosophically destructive because without orienting ourselves with purpose, there can be no meaningful discernments of truth, love, and morals or the work at all or magic at all. And this also applies to freedom or even a self. You can't even have this idea of a self. There's no foundation for you to make a claim about a self because there's no purpose to that. There's no meaning for a self. A purposeless worldview is self-contradictory and non sequitur upon its presuppositions. Without telos, one cannot sustain any form of worldviews, principles, liberties, or success. You literally can't have a worldview without telos. There's no meaning to a worldview then. So if you say that you have a worldview of no worldview, it's self-contradictory, thus a non sequitur. True will presupposes a knowable, describable, and manifestable goal, which the individual is responsible for reaching, and the entire initiatory framework from the HGA, the Holy Guardian Angel, to the Abyss is built upon telos. The true will is the highest form of telos, meaning the apotheosis, right? Again, that term. So what is the AA? A lot of people are not familiar with the AA. They just know Thelema. Well, AA stands for Astrum Argenteum. The AA is a Western esoteric and philosophical order founded in 1907 by Aleister Crowley and George Cecil Jones. Its purpose is not the formation of belief, but the deliberate advancement of humanity through disciplined perfection of the individual on every plane of being. To this end, the order employs a graded series of initiations, each corresponding to a universal stage in the unfoldment of consciousness rather than to a social rank or an institutional authority rank. The initiatory system of the AA is distinctly syncretic, drawing together the interior discipline of Theravada Buddhism, the metaphysical insight and practice methods of Vedantic yoga, and the symbolic operation of ceremonial magic, but ultimately are all derived from ancient esoteric Comedian teachings, which I call the craft, which is the origins of Freemasonry. These methods are organized according to the Kabbalistic tree of life, Freemasonic rites and symbolism, and rituals, and the tarot, all of which serves as both a map of the human psyche and a cosmological diagram of spiritual ascent. Within this framework, the order pursues what it terms scientific illuminism, the systematic investigation, practice, and transmission of mystical and magical techniques, tested through direct experience rather than accepted on blind faith. So it uses the scientific method. A lot of people think that occultism is just superstition, woo-woo stuff. No, occultists are always endeavoring to understand things through trial and error. They're using the scientific method. They are using the proper use of the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric. They're using the 7 liberal arts. A central doctrinal and instructional text of the AA is One Star in Sight, which lays out the aspirant's path through the successive grades of attainment from the initial status of probationer to the consummate realization of ipsissimus, which means self, magister templi, which means master of the temple. Each grade represents a defined and authentic transformation and milestone in discipline, knowledge, awareness, consciousness, and liberty, but most critically, the knowledge and conversation of the guardian angel. Really, it's of one's guardian angel and crossing of the abyss. One Star in Sight remains indispensable for understanding the AA's orderly approach to personal and spiritual development and the integrative character of its esoteric philosophy. And if I didn't say this before, Astrum Argenteum means the silver star in Latin. And obviously we're talking a lot about stars. We're going to be talking about that. But this silver star, the One Star in Sight, it's talking about the North Pole star, the directional star that gives us orientation metaphorically, allegorically, symbolically. And so when we're talking about this star, we're talking about the star within us, and we're talking about the star above us, which in Freemasonry, in the most ancient stellar cults, represented the one grand architect of the universe, represented God, the Godhead. Here's a few quotes from the AA. There is no bond of union among the members of the AA save the pursuit of the great work. The student shall make himself thoroughly acquainted with the methods of science and the aim of religion. Important. The first task of the aspirant is to control the mind. Very, very crucial. Any man or woman can look for the entrance, and any man or woman who is within can teach another to seek it, but only those who are fit can arrive within it. And this is coming from an account of AA subfigura 33, and that number 33 is very significant. Now, of course, some may take this as a elitist idea, but what this really means is that you have to do the work to enter. That's what it means by fit. It's not saying, hey, you can't enter into the holy temple of the self without, some authoritarian approval. No. What it's really meaning deeply is that you have to meet the requirements. You have to be fit to enter that mentally, spiritually. It's very important to distinguish the context about this. Now, the seal of the Astrum Argenteum says Civilum Sanctum Fraternitas, and that just means sigil of the brotherhood. The seal of the heptagram, this seven-pointed star is called a heptagram, is the thalamic symbol employed within the AA as a glyph of integration, initiation, and completed cycle of manifestation. And it should not be confused with the far more elaborate Siligium Dei Ai Meth. But that's the sigil from John Dee's Enochian system. The seven-pointed star signifies the sevenfold process of becoming, corresponding simultaneously to the classical planets being the Elohim, which means the wanderers, the seven chakras, the seven northern circumpolar constellations. So in the stellar cult and stellar myths, this would be Horus and the six glorious ones, the seven hermetic principles, the Sephirotic unity, so the unification of the dualistic Sephiroths of the Tree of Life, the diatonic scale, which is a musical scale from A to G, which is 7 notes, and then the 8 is the next higher octave. So you repeat back, so the 8 would be the A in a higher octave or lower octave, depending on which way you're taking that scale. The 7 prism spectrum, so the 7 visible colors that we get from shining light through a prism, and this is how our eyes work, the 7 liberal arts, and the 7 stages of embodied initiation plus much more. So the 7 is a very, very sacred number. It is the number of completion and higher order. There's a lot to the 7. We don't have time to get into everything about the 7. At each point appears the letters of the name Babylon, which is spelled different because it's spelled with a B-A-B-A-L-O-N rather than B-A-B-Y-L-O-N, as declaration that the divine feminine permeates every stage of manifestation, the principle that receives, transforms, and redeems forces through experience. She is the vessel of all becoming, the alchemical womb in which opposites are dissolved and recombined. We're going to be talking a lot about Babylon. So when it comes to the name of Babylon, this altered spelling was revealed to Crowley during some altered Enochian rituals out in the desert, and it became central for his text, The Vision and the Voice. Now I'm going to add in my own take on the spelling. There's a lot of different takes on the spelling, and a lot of them have a lot of very deep meaning. So in the Egyptian cosmology and belief systems, the Ba was a crucial component of the human soul, personality, and individuality, or direct spiritual manifestation. And so we have the double Ba in this word. And to me, this symbolizes the second birth. And then the Lan, the L-O-N, can be broken down in green language as El, God, as in Elohim, but El is singular for God, and On. And On means things like energy, light. When you turn something on, it has spirit. It gives it spirit. So it initiates the surge, the spark of the self, the spark of the soul. Now, lon etymologically is not a very meaningful suffix when you look into it. However, it does have some interesting other connotations to it. I think the green language works out the best here. I think the ba is the most important to recognize and to understand how this is representing the invocation of spirit and the second birth. And we'll see why that is here shortly. Now, I want to take a deeper look at the sigil of the silver star, specifically the inner equation. So in the middle of the sigil, we find a cryptic equation. And when you look at the symbol, it may be a little daunting for some. I know it took me a little while to recognize what was being spoken here through symbolic language. But we have a 7 at the top. We have a 7 at the top, which then it looks to be separated by a cross of the Templars, and that shape specifically where the arms of that cross fan outward and expand to get wider and taller, tends to be a signifier of a Templar cross. But then we have another 7, so it's 7 cross 7, and then you have 77 cross horizontal line cross 77, and then below that horizontal line, below the Vesica Pisces, the inner womb of the Vesica Pisces, we have another 7. So when we're looking at this, you know, a lot of people would be probably perplexed with what it's saying. It's actually a mathematical equation. So it's 77 plus 7 divided by 7 plus 77. And so the process, there's a few different ways you can get to the answer for this, but this is the method that I use, which is you add the numerator first, which is 7 plus 7, which equals 4. And then you divide by 7, which is the number underneath the horizontal division line. So that's 14 divided by 7, which is 2. And then you finish with addition. And so this would be 77 plus 2 plus 77, which equals 156. Now, there's a few different ways you can get to this number, but that is just a mathematical equation preserved in this. And the reason why is because the number of Babylon was said to be 156. And this was one of the mathematical methodologies that was used to get to that number, a cryptic cipher, if you will. We're going to be talking a lot about this number later on when we get more deep into gematria. There's a lot more to this symbol, obviously, but in the Thelemic gematria, 156 corresponds to Babylon, Crowley's number for the Scarlet Woman. The division line is encompassed by the womb of Nuit, the womb of creation. So that Vesica Pisces womb in the middle represents that womb of creation. And the division line in between represents the as above, so below principle. And you can break this symbol down a lot when it comes to it. Those crosses are extremely crucial, especially when you understand the evolution of the gavel and the axe. And then that circle with the X in the middle is also extremely crucial. And for more of that, I would highly recommend Nate Cap's work from the Cubbyhole to really understand how this pertains to the circle dot and how it pertains to understanding our orientation to getting back to our center and finding spirit and self, and also how it relates to the Egyptian models and mythos, and a lot to do with the Osiris ritual and the evolution of the stellar, lunar, and solar cults. One thing I would like to add, since we're talking so much about symbolism, is that we have to understand that when it comes to the occult traditions, going all the way back to the earliest mystery traditions and going all the way back into the earliest indigenous cultures, wherever you look, it's not the symbol itself that is being venerated or worshiped. It is the principle, what the symbol represents, the idea. But that principle also has a direct relation to something within nature or within ourselves. So, some type of phenomenon or some type of mystery, discovery, or science, something that has to do with the archetypal realm. So it's really important to understand this. A lot of people get confused when it comes to this because they think that they're actually worshiping the symbol itself, and some people do. So in many religious, especially the big three, the Abrahamic religions, they end up worshiping the symbols a lot of times. For example, whenever the Norse traditions or Northern European traditions would wear the animal skins, they would wear the skin of the wolf or the bear, etc. People thought that they were worshiping the animal itself, and that did turn into that kind of decadent ritual and behavior. But originally, it was about invocating and respecting and connecting to the spirit of that animal, just the same as the tree. And so we find this in Native American cultures too, where we find spirit in all things. And so symbolism is the language of the universe, and that's why it is so important to understand. But symbols are simply a representation of something. And so we have to understand what that thing that is being represented actually is, and to become more clear when it comes to what these symbols are actually representing, we have to use the proper methodology. And one method for that is to actually get back to pure forms. So the simpler the symbol, the more knowledge can be preserved in it. But at the same time, the more complex the symbol, the harder it becomes for you to be able to reconnect the principle, the simple principle of a simple circle dot. So this, to me, this sigil here is a complex form. And most likely the individuals who came up with this, maybe a few of them really understood the depths of this symbolism and why it's crucial to understand. But most likely it is still, and still to this day, perplexes a lot of people because of the complexity of it and because of the way that it's been romanticized throughout history, and how symbolism gets romanticized as the object of veneration rather than the object of representation for a spiritual allegory or metaphor to understand ourselves and to understand something within the realm of the universe and the realm of the effects, the material realm. In the theology of Thelema, the principles are personified by a trinity of ancient Egyptian divinities. Nuit, the goddess of infinite space and possibility, think of it as a circle. Hadit, the winged serpent of light and the infinitely small point of consciousness. So you can think of that as the circled dot. And then Rahor Kuit, the crowned and sovereign child embodied action and harmony with true will, the dynamic force of manifestation that emerges from the alchemical union and becoming with the universal law of love. So within the Trinity, there is another Trinity, a 33. Kind of interesting. And it gets more layered as you go deeper. But you have Ra, which is the solar masculine principle, Kuit, which is the lunar and feminine principle, and then Hor, which comes from, it's actually a version of Horus, and it's a solar divine child. Now, another trinity that we find in Thelema is the trinity of aeons. But what is an aeon? An aeon denotes a long epoch of human spiritual and psychological development marked by a dominant formula of consciousness rather than a precise historical chronology. The term aeon derives from the Greek aeon, meaning age, lifetime, or eternity. and is related to a Proto-Indo-European root, Iwa, which is interesting because it kind of connects to Iwas, um, meaning life or vital force. Crowley's use of the term reflects this meaning. Aeons are not merely a span of time, but living patterns of consciousness that shape humanity's understanding of nature, philosophy, science, and culture. In my personal take, the importance is not the aeon as a time frame, but the allegory of the archetypes as a model for the unification of the self. So the trinity of aeons is the aeon of Isis, which is the goddess divine mother traditions, which relates to the emotions, which also relates to spirit. And now on the relief that we see here, we see Isis on the right. The next aeon that came after that was the aeon of Osiris, which is the creator god, father, which represents thoughts. And that's in the middle, so it represents mind. And then the aeon of Horus, which is the male child or hero, which represents right action and wisdom, which is the body as well, and that's on the left. If we wanted to have a more scholarly approach to the aeons, it would be more prudent to put it in the correct context of the stellar, lunar, and solar cults and the evolution of the mythos and religious thought that is the foundation for all the mystery schools. And for anybody who's studied my work or Nate Cap's work or Albert Churchward's work, you should recognize why I would bring that criticism to the table. One of the most prominent aeons, though, is the aeon of Horus. Thelema posits that human history can be divided into different spiritual epochs or aeons, each marked by a specific spiritual model that is a result of human condition. The previous aeon was the aeon of Osiris, associated with themes of death, resurrection, sacrifice, betrayal. The aeon of Horus succeeds it. Aeons do not replace one another abruptly. Instead, there is a gradual overlap and shift over extended periods. The aeon of Horus, also known as the aeon of the crowned and conquering child, is a central concept within Thelemic tradition. It represents a distinct spiritual era or age characterized by a shift in human consciousness and the emergence of humanity's alignment with natural law and true will of creation. This symbolically represents the aeon of personal responsibility to the great work, to evolve ourselves and by doing so, help evolve the whole. This can only be done by the collapse of the false belief in the legitimacy of the master-slave relationship and the emergence of true love under will. This means we have to get our epistemology, logic, metaphysics, and ethics sound before we can do that work. And again, here is Crowley's deck with the card Aeon, and it's very revealing. The Holy Guardian Angel, which I will be using the acronym HGA for, or also known as Algeides, is considered a profoundly personal connection to the higher self that plays a crucial role as a unique guide to the true will. The primary goal in Thelema is to discover and align with true will, which is often equated with true purpose, telos, that extends beyond the lower carnal desires. The HGA is believed to aid in this process by sharing wisdom and providing guidance on how to attain alignment with telos. This is emphasized in the use of rituals, meditation, magical practices, and most importantly, shadow work as a means to make contact with your HGA. For the HGA to manifest in our lives, we must quiet the ego mind. This is so vitally important to this, is that all the chatter that we have going on in our head, we will not be able to hear the HGA's wisdom if that chatter is blocking it out. So we have to quiet the mind and learn to listen to its wisdom, its deeper, deeper wisdom. One of the most famous rituals associated with this concept is the Abermelin operation, a complex and intensive ritual intended to attain direct communication with one's HGA. The relationship with the HGA is ongoing and evolves over time. It is not a one-time revelation, but a continuous process of growth, healing, self-discipline, learning, realization, and liberty. So the symbol to the right is often depicted as a symbolic representation of the process of the communication or communion with the holy guardian angel. As you can see, you have the all-seeing eye at the top with the rays of light shining down. You have a dove. This dove represents the Holy Spirit in the Christian tradition. It also represents a sacred feminine aspect. I've talked about the dove a lot. It represents the moon in the day sky. So it's also about the reflection of the sunlight, because that's what the moon does. It reflects the masculine. So the feminine reflects the masculine. It's very important to understand that. And it's coming down, right? This protective Holy Spirit, the holy guardian angel is coming down. And what do we see? We see a chalice, a grail, which has the rose, the red rose. Is that color red again? With the Knights of the Templar cross in the middle with a heart, a blue shape heart, and then flames, as if the candle, as if the heart is a candle and the flower, the petals are at the top there. You have the single flame as if the top of the flower is the top of a candle, obviously, and then the brim of the chalice is also on fire. Now, somebody may look at that and say it looks like leaves, and I could see that as well. But I believe that it represents the flame of the self. So this is the communion with you when you've done your work. That's what that also represents. And then obviously the shape again, the Vesica Pisces shape that is encompassing this beautiful artwork. So what is this Abramelin ritual? The Abramelin ritual originates from a medieval grimoire titled The Book of Abramelin, attributed to Abraham Wurzburg, not good with German either, a Jewish mystic said to have lived in the 15th century. The text claims to record Abraham's teachings after learning the system from an Egyptian mage named Abramelin. The oldest of the texts survived in German, right around 1608, same time as the Lesser Key of Solomon. But an incomplete version was translated into French in the 18th century, which is the version that entered modern occultism through the 19th century. French translation by S.L. MacGregor Mathers, a founder of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. This version became foundational for modern ceremonial magic and later influenced the Lema. As with correct fasting and psychological fortitude can be harmful or life-threatening, all accumulating in a direct encounter with your HGA, followed by the symbolic subjugation and integration of chaotic inner archetypal demons, forces. So chaotic forces represent the inner archetypal demons within us, or inner archetypal modes of consciousness. Now, to make this clear, I do not advocate for anybody to take on this ritual. It is no joke and could be life-threatening if not done correctly, okay? Very important to understand. I personally have not taken on this ritual at all, but I've read an extensive amount about this ritual and studied quite a bit about it. And Crowley attempted to try this from the incomplete translation from Mathers, but ultimately failing. And supposedly this is why his house on Loch Ness Lake, that mansion there, which they just refurbished, which is kind of funny, had so much bad luck and bad things circling around it, including burning down. Some people hypothesize that it's because he attempted this ritual there and then failed at it. But I'm telling you, unless you do really in-depth study, you're going to find a mistranslated version of this text, and it could put your life in jeopardy. So I'm not advocating for you to do this. There are other methods to contact your holy guardian angel. And honestly, I would recommend doing Mark Passio's seminar on shadow work. And I think that's probably an extremely healthy methodology, but not the only methodology either. There are many versions and models that you can contact your holy guardian angel. There was a movie put out recently. It was a few years ago, A Dark Song, and it shows this process, and it's a great allegory. However, it does kind of fall into too much horror tropes, but it still has a great allegory to it, and I recommend watching that movie, and it might put it into perspective of, how dangerous this can be. So in this Abramelin ritual, there's an oil. The Abramelin oil appears in the book of the sacred magic of Abramelin the Mage. It's unknown why Mathers translated calamus as galingal. Cane bosom is often translated as calamus, which is called sweet flag. Calamus has been used for centuries, but it actually can be very toxic if not used properly. Some think it was just poor mistranslation, and others think it was done intentionally due to calamus's toxic properties, meaning that they could have some psychedelic effects to it. The Abramelin oil is a direct adaptation of the biblical holy anointment oil described in Exodus 30:22 through 25, which the ingredients are myrrh, cinnamon or cassia, shimon, zayat or olive oil, and last but not least, cane bosom, which translates to fragrant cane. And that's the important part. Modern linguistic experts and scholars are now accepting that this fragrant cane, referred to by the ancient Jews, is actually cannabis. The root, KNH, is linguistically cognate with terms used for hemp and cannabis in several ancient Near Eastern languages: Scythian, Assyrian, Persian. Residue analysis from some of the ancient altars, notably in Judah, has confirmed ritual cannabis use. Cannabis fits the description of a fragrant, resinous cane, unlike calamus, which is primarily a root. Cannabis has been revered as an entheogenic plant of the Great Mother, associated with fertility, healing, altered states of consciousness, spirituality, and restoration. As a fragrant cane and resin-bearing herb, it was linked to the earth's mysteries and the female principles and attributes. In ancient Near Eastern, Indo-European, and Indic goddess cults, cannabis was and is used in shamanic initiation rituals for the purpose of connecting higher consciousness through a methodical means of cleansing the mind, body, and spirit. So the point with this is that most likely this Abramelin oil was an oil derived from cannabis, and that the cannabis plant is extremely healing and has amazing properties to it for the well-being of an individual if used properly. Of course, you can use it improperly. I always look at things like this as a spiritual aid, but not an end-all, take it and then you automatically are enlightened or something like this. Obviously, I have been a frequent cannabis user my entire life. I have thus actually since many years have actually slowed down quite a bit, and I don't really use cannabis anymore. I don't even remember the last time I used it, but cannabis is very powerful. It aided me on my spiritual path, but I also fell into the trappings of chronic abuse of it. And so you have to be careful because it will have very negative effects if you are not using it consciously. Just like any substance from nature, you have to understand its properties and understand what it's meant to be used for. Its telos, right? Its purpose. Along with the Abramelin ritual, some inject this part of it, some don't. But this is a ritual among occultists that is often used, which is the binding of the 4 crown princes of hell, or the 4 princes of evil. which is best understood as an initiatory act of self-mastery rather than an invocation of real demons, although is not part of Crowley's original system. That's important to understand. This is added in later. The traditional princes, Lucifer, Satan, Leviathan, and Belial, represent imbalance expressions of the four cardinal elements within the psyche: illusion, destructive force, emotional chaos, and material stagnation. The magician symbolically reorders these currents so that they will serve the higher purpose of the self and the true will. So I have a little graph that I've broken down here. So Lucifer, obviously Lucifer can have a very positive thing to it. There's dark Lucifer, Luciferian traditions, and light Luciferian traditions, because Lucifer means light bearer. So I put inverted here. So I've put inverted in brackets here as the inverted principle of Lucifer. This represents the element of air, which is intellect, the cardinal direction of east, because Lucifer is associated to Venus, which is the morning star that rises right before the sun rises in the east, specifically on the spring equinox. So we can see Venus, and we see it in its crescent, which is also important. And Venus is a feminine planet as well, which connects to the lunar phases and the crescent moon phases. And there's a lot to that. I've explained a lot of that. So the meaning is light bearer, Venus, like I said, and this is left brain imbalance of intellect without conscience, and the balancing principle of the sacred feminine. And this could be reduced down to authoritarianism, hubris, narcissism, eugenics, and dysgenics. Satan is the element of fire, cardinal direction of south, due south, and the meaning, the adversarial and oppositional principle, conflict and separation through lower will without balance and untempered by telos and logos, left brain imbalance without conscience, and the balancing principle of the sacred or sacred feminine. Again, another left brain imbalance. And this can be reduced to selfishness, egoism, Machiavellianism, social Darwinism, and religion. Now, I'm not trying to explain all this stuff, obviously. I'm expecting you to have done some work. So if you need to go and look these things up to realize why they're being correlated this way, then do it. Do your due diligence. Leviathan is the element of water, cardinal direction west, meaning dissolution, emotional excess, addiction, and pure hedonism. This is the right brain imbalance without intellect and the balancing force of the sacred masculine principle. And this relates to moral relativism, mania, chaos for the sake of chaos. There's a lot of things that you could put under Leviathan. Very interesting study, by the way. Belial is the element of earth, cardinal direction north, meaning primacy in the material, rejection of the higher cosmic order and law, stagnation and entropy, matter ruling spirit instead of a balance with it, left brain imbalance without sorry, I got my camera in front of it. Conscience and the balancing principle of the sacred feminine. So we have amoralism, psychopathy, solipsism, scientism, and nihilism. And now some of these can overlap, obviously. You know, you could put all these in Satan's bracket, honestly, or in Satan's section. But yeah, and I really like these images that I brought to the forefront because some will invoke these in order to bring about more and feed into them, right? Feed into these four princes of hell. And so that would be the image on the right, you know, and then some will invoke them in order to bring about an orderly, process to align it to the true will. And that would be the image on the left. That would be the light occultist, the one who is really doing the true work, which is ultimately the real authentic purpose of this ritual. Now, another key theme in Thelema is the abyss, or crossing the abyss. The abyss represents a metaphysical concept that signifies the great chasm or void separating the manifest world, the effects, from its divine source, causation, and separates the human ego from true spiritual realization. The abyss is not a place of evil or punishment. It represents the formidable barrier that the adept must enter and traverse to attain the grade of Magister Templi, Latin for Master of the Temple. This hero's journey involves the complete dissolution and distilling of the ego and the confronting of Choronzon, the demon guardian of the abyss, which originated within the writing of the 16th century occultists Edward Kelly and John Dee, who embodies the abstract parts of conditioning of the mind that resists spiritual unification. Successfully crossing the abyss signifies a profound transformation, marking the aspirant's progress towards higher consciousness, raised spirit, and self-mastery. In recognizing the multifaceted nature of crossing the abyss, perhaps the most significant lesson is approaching the spiritual path with openness, acknowledging that mastery is not an end, but a continual unfolding process of becoming. The form of spiritual attainment does not equate to saintliness or the absence of flaws. And so here is another document from the Astrum Argentium, the Oath of the Abyss. So I, name of a member of the body of God, hereby bind myself on behalf of the whole universe, even as we are now physically bound unto the cross of suffering, that I will lead a pure life as devoted servant of the order. What order is that? It's the order of truth. It's the order of the cosmic source of order. Now, this gets perverted into the order itself being a clandestine society. No, it's the true order, the ordering function of the universe. That's the true order. That's the highest lodge. That I will love all things. That I will understand all things, that I will love all things, that I will perform all things and endure all things, that I will continue in the knowledge and conversation of my holy guardian angel, that I will work without attachment, that I will work in truth, that I will rely upon myself, that I will interpret every phenomenon as a particular dealing of God with my soul. And if I fail herein, may my pyramid be profane and the eye be closed upon me. Very significant, meaning the eye of provenance, the eye of the true self. And yes, the third eye as well. So as you can see right here, it's saying, dedication to truth, get rid of the ego, connection to higher self, devotion to true order, to natural law, understanding what love really is, understanding how to have poise and endure what it's going to take to do this work. So this is the Oath of the Abyss. Moving on to one of the central themes of this presentation. This section is called The Red Goddess, and it is in direct reference to a Thelema archetype known as Babylon, which we talked about Babylon earlier in the Astrum Argentium star with the name Babylon. The goddess Babylon is a powerful and complex figure whose role is identified by the ultimate spiritual test in the Thelemic tradition, which is known as the crossing of the abyss. This event is chronicled in detail in The Vision and the Voice, Liber 418. She is often symbolized as the Scarlet Woman or the Red Goddess, and many others. Embodying the liberated sacred feminine principle, she has been correlated to the 7 phases of the blood moon cycle and many more lunar cycles, and a lot of other astrotheological phenomenons, but that is one of the primary cycles that she is correlated to, or the symbolism is correlated to. Babylon stands as the great mother at the very threshold of the supernal realms, the highest planes of consciousness, which in the Kabbalistic tree of life diagram would be Kether, Chokmah, and Banah. This boundary is the abyss, which in this Kabbalistic tree of life would be considered it's not an emanation because it's not considered a Sephiroth, but it's the realm of Da'ath. To cross the abyss and attain the highest initiatory grade, Master of the Temple, the magician must perform a profound act of surrendering and submitting the ego to Babylon. This is total surrender to truth itself. This is symbolized by casting their lifeblood, quote unquote lifeblood, which represents attachments, fears, expectations, trauma, ego, conditioning, all this baggage that we have into the quote unquote cup of abominations. And right there, people would immediately be like, what the fuck's going on? Cup of abominations. Well, it's extremely important to understand what this process means and how this model is working through the symbolism, I should say. Then by drinking this offering, Babylon judges the true sincerity of the sacrifice. If the surrender is absolute, the fragmented ego is destroyed and then reborn anew, as the aspirant is redeemed, allowing their spiritual essence, their quintessence, and true self to pass and be raised into the supernal triad, which is known as the city of the pyramids. That has a lot of deep meaning. I can't get into all that right now. I'm just hoping to whet your appetite for understanding this. This is not a gentle process. Say it again. This is not a gentle process. It is a personal, painstaking process of self-awareness and the ability to fully confront all of the things we ignore and hate about ourselves. So, again, this is about doing that shadow work. She is symbolic of the ultimate highest teacher through chaos. Chaos, I've always said this, chaos is the ultimate teacher. When you stick your hand on a hot stove, the chaos of that is teaching me not to stick my hand on that hot stove. And through this process, we transform the broken self into a whole self through true remembrance. Remembrance is not just about memory. It is about bringing the members back together, the disjointed pieces, the fragmented pieces, similar to the Osiris legend and mythos. And then as this remembrance takes place, we become the master of our own inner temple. Now, Babylon gets perverted extremely, and it's hard to follow all the perversion of how it takes place. Again, you find her in the book of Revelations, known as the mother of harlots and the mother of whores. And again, her symbol is taken by Crowley and others and tried to bring back the sacredness of that by removing the dogma around a sacred feminine principle. And in the book of Revelations, she rides in on a multi-headed beast. I think it's a 7-headed beast with 10 horns, it says. And we'll get to a little bit of that here in a bit. David Shoemaker, in his book, Living Thelema, says, when Babylon is reduced to sexuality alone, her initiatory function is lost. Vital to understand that, because a lot of people will just look at this symbolism and think it is just purely about sexuality, and it's not. However, sexuality is a part of it, and it should be embraced because sexuality is a sacred thing about our existence. But it is not solely, in the perverted aspects and context, a sexual symbol. If that's how you look at it, you're not living in alignment with the true will, and you're not following the teachings truly at all. So Babylon has many different depictions throughout history and many different cultures, specifically depicting Babylon as the mother of harlots, or mother of whores. Now, we see this character depicted in movies like The Matrix with the girl in the red dress. We know that red is a very attractive symbol and color. And red also correlates to the root chakra as well, and can be correlated to lower aspects of consciousness. This is all true. But we also have to understand that just because it's the color red doesn't mean that it's evil, or just because it's on the lower aspects of the chakra spectrum and ladder doesn't mean that it's bad. In fact, that kind of worldview is part of the issue, where we get programmed with certain archetypal ideas and, in fact, mnemonic ideas about these archetypes is a better way of putting it. And then it colors the way that we look at these symbols. So let's take a look here at some of these on the screen. On the far left here, we have Shakti, which is a supreme deity of divine energy, of the sacred feminine energy, a protection, a very powerful symbol. And we see here, she has the beast as well, right? So Babylon in Revelations is said to be riding on a scarlet beast with 7 heads and 10 horns. That's the Christian version of Babylon. We also have Kali. Kali is another version that many Thelemic initiates and Thelemic masters have correlated to Babylon. We have Ishtar as well. And as we see in this picture of Ishtar, which is the relief with the lady standing with the lion with the wings, again, another fertility symbol, another positive symbol of Babylon. In fact, even in the Marvel series, Scarlet Witch, she has positive attributes. She has positive methods for her, but obviously there's some negative stuff that takes place as well. We find Babylon in many different mythological models. As you see above the Scarlet Witch, this is again Aleister Crowley's tarot deck. And then we have the Weight tarot deck, which is the strength card, which is the number 8. And you have the infinity sign above that. And so it is literally depicting not only Virgo and Leo in the zodiacal symbolism, but the divine feminine, sacred masculine principle. And you can see that there's a uniformity to a lot of these symbols, right? In the Egyptian tradition, she has been correlated to Hathor, another goddess of fertility and goddess of protection. And that's the one on the complete right side here. So when we're talking about Babylon, obviously there's a correlation to the city of Babylon, spelled with a Y, which is the great capital city, Mesopotamia, or modern-day Iraq, from 2300 to 612 BCE. The modern spelling of the city, Babylon with a Y, is actually based on a much older Akkadian word, which is Babalu, which breaks down to gateway of the god. Now, the reason why I'm bringing up this definition is because on the screen here, we have Ishtar. And so in the city of Babylon, there was the Ishtar Gate, which was located in this capital. One of the important factors about Ishtar is that she is actually a later version of an earlier Akkadian goddess, which is Inanna or Inanna. Now, this goddess is also symbolized the same as all the others, just an earlier version. It's important that when we're looking at these goddess archetypes, or any archetype in the evolution of the mythos, that we're looking for the ubiquity, the similarities that can help you trace it back to its more pure form, right? So the differences help you to distinguish what's taking place in the culture itself and how the culture is evolving and how it's changing. But the ubiquity will allow you to see the static idea through history and how it's getting carried over from previous iterations of the earlier forms of this symbolism. One of the things that I find that's interesting in the ubiquity of Inanna is that not only is she a symbol of sex, war, fertility, but she's also a symbol of justice. And we see that also in another goddess symbol of Ma'at in the Egyptian tradition, the goddess of truth and justice. Now, it's interesting, right? Because I correlated Babylon to Hathor here as well. But what we're really correlating is the principal ideas. And so my take on this is that, you know, these overlaps of these traditions and these principles, or the overlap of the outer shell of these principles, the form, you know, versus the substance, right? So we're looking at the form. The form is the outer symbolic representation. You know, it is the formation that is being used for these principles. And those principles is what I call the substance. So we're looking for the substance of that. And so that idea of justice, like I said, goes back to Ma'at. So there's a correlation here. And as I stated, you know, the devotion to Babylon, the submission, as if you're submitting an application, right, to this principle, is that of truth, and that's and truth and justice, and that's part of why I wanted to bring that up. Now, Inanna has a bunch of earlier versions of the name. Inin is one of them. Nana, Ninana, Inanna, Nina, Ernina, Nar. There is a common belief with the name that her name comes from Nin Nana, which translates to Queen of Heaven. Now, this gives us a direct correlation to Nuit of the Egyptian tradition. Again, the queen of the sky, right? The queen of the cosmos. The blanket, which is the space, the infinite vastness and ineffable space, the boundless space that encompasses as the circle, right? That all the stars are embedded in or express themselves through. However, there are a lot of mistranslations that take place when we're looking at these things, and some scholars state that the the origins of the etymology of the name Inanna does not come from that, but the principle, it remains the same, even if the name is not etymologically connected to that. It is a sky goddess. And as an example of this, there's a bunch of shrines along the Euphrates rivers, right? And they're all dedicated to Ishtar or Inanna. So during the 4th millennia BCE, we have the temple of Eanna that arises and is discovered to be around that time area, which translates to what? House of Heaven. Again, correlating this back to a more ancient form of that Egyptian deity. When you exchange the vowel and reduce the word, you can get Ani or Annie. And that name is highly significant. Anybody who's watched Twin Peaks should know that Annie is a highly symbolic character, and she's sacrificed. But what it really goes back to is the papyrus of Ani or Ani, which is the Egyptian Book of the Dead. So I think it's important to note here in Liber 122, which is interesting. We're going to get to some gematria here shortly. And that actually reduces down to 23, which we'll see a little bit about what that actually means. But it states in Liber 122, now therefore I am known to ye by my name Nuit, and to him by a secret name, which I will give him when at last he knoweth me, since I am infinite space and the infinite stars. Therefore do ye also thus bind nothing. Let there be no difference made among you between any one thing and any other thing, for thereby there cometh hurt. So it's interesting because in the statement, originally infinite space and infinite stars, the first letter of each of those words was not capitalized, only infinite space was capitalized. Later, Crowley adapted a new textual form to capitalize to add significance and cryptic meaning, just like I have been doing throughout this presentation, to put a higher form of substance, a higher meaning of the substance of that form. So if you actually take the first letter of each of those words, I-S, infinite space, infinite stars, we now have a connection, a cryptic connection to Isis. Again, another sacred feminine goddess being correlated to Babylon and Nuit. I'm going to go back for a second to this slide. So this idea of crossing the abyss and then meeting the goddess Babylon is not only part of the hero's journey, representing that pentagram inverted and the spirit in the southern position. The abyss is also correlated with the Duat in the Egyptian tradition. The demon Choronzon that we come to face, as I said before, is the amalgamation of all of our internal shadow issues, our traumas, our repressed desires, our repressed memories, in fact, anything that has to do with the dark triad is preserved within this. So if you happen to have tendencies of narcissism, psychopathy, or Machiavellianism, the Choronzon will mirror that image. And for you to come in contact with Babel, you have to correctly overcome that. This process of crossing the abyss is an arduous task. It's not an easy task to raise ourselves out of the coffin, obviously. And this is what Choronzon represents, is the painstaking work as well that we have to persevere through. And when we meet Babylon, as I said before, you have to dedicate and submit your whole being to the cup of abominations. People hear this word abominations and they don't understand. This cup represents the Holy Grail, represents the sacred feminine vessel. And, a lot of people correlate Babylon to sexual lust, and that is the inversion of this symbol. That is part of it. All these symbols are dualistic. They can be utilized in many, many different frameworks. But I'm telling you that this is what it represents in Thelema. And so you pour over your quote-unquote life essence into the cup to prove to the sacred feminine that you have truly overcome the trials and tribulations, that you truly have done your work, that you've done your shadow work, and that you can pass into a second birth. And then you can reach the supernal triad of the city of pyramids, okay? And so Babylon is a powerful symbol. And yes, red correlates to the menstrual cycles of the female processes as well. And so for men, we don't have a natural cycle where we naturally bleed. So usually bloodletting or some form of blood rite or ritual is used to imitate that sacred feminine process. In fact, there's a lot of psychological studies showing there's a huge connection between this self-esteem issue in the subconscious mind of men because we can't, give birth, and we don't have the menstrual cycle, the life. We don't have a natural process of showing the life-giving force, which was symbolized as blood. So there's a lot to this. It's not just something that can be easily explained in one pass through. And that's why I like David Shoemaker's quote here, because he's saying whenever you reduce this to purely a sexual symbol, a lustful symbol, you've already failed. You will be the abomination in the cup, because you still have not conquered Karanzan, symbolically, obviously. So when it comes to the red goddess, or the scarlet witch, or Babylon, a lot of people ask why the color red. It's a very important question. The color red functions as a apotropaic color, and that word means a protective color, embodying the protective and purifying qualities of fire or spirit. Now, it obviously embodies a lot of other things that we correlate in nature. So it embodies boundaries, vitality, purification, courage, and the prefix of courage means heart. So the cur is the heart energy, passion, desire, love, anger, danger, action, luck, fertility, union, power, energy. And I meant to put in here blood as well. I'm not sure why that's not on there, but it also has a deep connection to blood. So it gets associated over time through the evolution and the complexities of human culture and the human psychology and societies and rituals. It gets romanticized into a decadent symbol yet again because it gets misunderstood for what it truly represents. So when you go back to indigenous cultures, you're going to find that they would correlate the color red with the red clay of the earth, and they would consider it to be a very sacred feminine symbol, actually, even though modernly we would look at red as an active masculine symbol. It would be considered the red of the earth, but also then when you go back into the Egyptian tradition, the red deserts, it would also be considered to be a masculine symbol there because Geb or Jeb would be considered that of the earth, whereas Nuit would be that of the sky goddess, which is Nuit's brother. So Jeb is Nuit's brother, the earth god. So it's important to understand staying oriented with the way the symbolism and the gender roles of that symbolism kind of flip-flop depending on the way the culture is going. And we see this with solar symbols throughout the Greco-Roman period, where originally, you would have a symbol that symbolizes the sun in a masculine form like Apollo, and then you would have a feminine dominant that would come in later to overlap that in some traditions. I thought I would add this here because my son's name is Rowan, and there's a specific reason why we named him Rowan. It was actually of the choice and recommendation of my beautiful girlfriend. So as an example, I wanted to use the Rowan tree. And this tree is central to Scottish and Irish folklore, which is a vivid red berry tree, which was understood as concentrated life force. So this berry gets a symbolic association for its medical purposes and uses in different clans of the Northern Europeans, and it gets tied in with the spiritualization of nature. And so rowan crosses bound with red thread were placed over doorways, meaning made with rowan wood, in barns or carried on the person to ward off witchcraft, sorcery, and harmful enchantment. The red yarn around cattle or infants function as a visible counter charms against fairy influences or the magical use of the evil eye in Celtic traditions. Now, the evil eye, when you look it up, I have a really good book on this. It's a demonology book. I think it's from the 1950s, I believe, but it's the Encyclopedia of Demonology. When you look it up in there, it's kind of interesting, the history of the evil eye. It actually isn't what a lot of people think. So one of the origins of the evil eye was that of an old hag or an old witch or a very negative individual in the community that was giving you a glare, called the evil eye, that was said to curse individuals just with that glare. And one way of warding that evil eye was to counteract it with this, which then also gets called the evil eye as a warding spell. So young children would run around, and so when these old individuals, specifically old crones, would give them the evil glare because they're being free and doing what kids should do, the kids would throw this symbol up. Kind of interesting. There's a lot more stuff to that, but it's just a little interesting take that I thought I would add in there. This is also where Dio gets this idea because his grandmother taught him about this. Obviously, Dio knew very much about the occult. So I thought it was important to give an example of how this is used. Now, obviously, with most indigenous cultures, or even let's just take European mythology and spiritualism and animism and paganism, we have the sacred times such as like Beltane, Walpurgisnacht, where we have these fire rituals. And these fire rituals do what? Well, fire brings people together because it's warm, right? It brings heat in the cold. It brings light in the dark. So it's a very positive symbol. And it's associated to this red, this spiritual energy. And fire was seen as a spirit force because it was such a mysterious and elegant force, such as the dancing flames and how powerful it was, right? And you can think of the Greek mythology of Prometheus bringing fire from the gods to man, and then how he's tortured for that, as a good allegory for this as well. But one of the things that I also wanted to bring up is that fire is also used to ward off predators in ancient times and still currently. It is a very powerful implement of an elemental power that is used, that is very handy in tight situations. So whether it's you carrying a torch as a weapon to, fight off a predator in nature, or whether it's used to scare off predators at night by just lighting a fire, it has a very protective but also unifying principle to it. And it gets associated to this spiritual concept. So this concept of courage gets associated to it. This concept of action, right, gets associated to it. And this is why the Funnel Conference is so vital, because that's what this is about. It's about ignition, to ignite, right? And fire represents that spark of ignition, the work being done. It also represents a deep passion for something. And that can be passionate love, a burning desire. And it kind of also represents something that's very dangerous if not used properly, where you will get burned with using this elemental power. So we have to understand that it is our responsibility to understand how to wield these things if we are going to use them. And this is what the models of the symbolism was bringing forward, was the sciences of the not only the way that it worked, being the way that they had studied, let's say fire, for example, and that advances and continues to accumulate as we understand more and more about it, but also the way that an individual has a spiritual, which then would be considered to us nowadays a moral responsibility that goes along with it, the proper use of how to handle such elemental powers. So that's crucial when we're taking a look at these mystery traditions. And so when we look into Christianity, obviously Babylon takes on a very negative symbol, and this is where Aleister Crowley, growing up reading Revelations, the book of Revelations, he takes that symbol and tries to bring it back around into a more positive, bringing it and reconnecting it back to a ancient animism and also an ancient version of the sacred feminine traditions. And so Babylon takes on this new role. It is a rebirth of that ancient symbol to take it out of the profane and bring it back to the sacred. Unfortunately, a lot of Thelemites don't understand that, and they have taken it back into the profane. And this is just, it's done through many different things: ineptitude, as I said before, ignorance, lack of true initiatory rites. So that this is part of the rites, is understanding the responsibility of how to handle the symbolism. So this red is crucial. And we have to understand phonetically red also relates to something that we have read, like a book, like a symbol. So we have to really ground ourselves. And that's also why when we look at the Eastern Vedic tradition of the chakras, excuse my dog, she's making a nest for herself. But yes, when we look at the chakra system, red is the Muladhara. It is the base chakra system. And that base is crucial because it's foundational. And that without that foundation being square, level, and plumb, then we cannot build upon it. And so a lot of people look at the lower chakra systems as negative energy vortices or vortexes. And this is part of the misunderstanding of what that model was trying to preserve. It's not just a perpetual beeline straight up, it is a wave frequency. That's why the Kundalini serpents are used in a representation. The serpentine energy is used to represent that wave frequency moving up, not only biologically as electrical signals and energetic sources, but also metaphysically as a spiritual essence, raising the ground serpent, the thing that cannot fly through the air, through the wings of an eagle or a falcon, up into a higher spiritual plane. And so that's vital to understand. And this is also witnessed in nature when we see an eagle or falcon or a hawk, especially hawks, swoop down and pick up the land serpent and raise it into the air, which became a highly significant and highly spiritualized symbol. So the serpent gets, again, demonized into the profane when it actually was one of the most sacred symbols. And, the color correlations in nature to the symbolism, to the mystery traditions, is vital to understand, because when we fall into the dogma, which is what this is really about, this presentation is really about dispelling the dogma away from this sacred science. Not to say that the tradition does not have its flaws, or that every individual who brought the tradition together and systemized it, were perfect in their ability to do so. But that's our job. That's our job to understand that. And that's our job to penetrate that and then find what is valuable, find what is useful, find what aligns with natural law, and put that into play, into the world, and filter out and distill the dogma. It is the alchemical process to create something more pure, to get to that quintessence. And so the symbolism is just a trace for us to understand these principles. So I thought that was very necessary to bring to the table, is understand how the color red gets turned into the profane, the wicked, right? And turned into a negative aspect of, let's say, like fertility rituals with lust and the decadence of promiscuity, right? Being promiscuous, and how it gets associated to blood rituals. And another aspect of that would be that men cannot shed blood without being cut or being wounded, whereas women have a natural synchronized cycle with a celestial object and the natural phenomenons for bleeding. And so that bleeding became extremely sacred, but because of many different factors, sociological, psychological, the bloodletting rituals ends up becoming a profane method for appeasing these religious venerated forms so that we can bring good fertility to the tribe. And good fertility comes to the tribe basically from healthy agriculture, from having healthy crops. So then it gets overlapped with this idea of sacrificing to the gods so that the crops would stay good. And then obviously you have a lot of manipulation that comes into that. People in power start to realize they can use this to their advantage because other people don't fully comprehend what these symbols are. It's not just a black and white thing where it's so easy to comprehend exactly the ins and outs of the contexts of how these things become profane from the sacred, because it's not just something that happened in one night. It's due to a multitude of different factors. There's utility factors that are taking place. There's the factors of nescience that are taking place at this time period. There's a lot of different factors that play into this, but without, continuing on this rant here, the red goddess symbolizes the sacred boundary, a protective force. And in fact, the submission that you make to the cup, to the Holy Grail, is a submission. And see, a lot of people would take that word to submit as a master-slave relationship, but there are things that you should submit to. And I'll tell you one right now, and that is the objective truth. So the submission of yourself, the dedication and embodiment of harmonizing with the truth is what this process really is about. You are submitting to Babylon, not the religious symbolism of Babylon, but the principle of the truth, the metaphysical ideas and principles of this symbolism. So it's very crucial to understand. People, again, can't distinguish one from the other. They think you're worshiping the deity Babylon. And this is what happened to Jack Parsons. Little segue here. Jack Parsons got influenced by an outside source. I kind of mentioned a few things about Jack Parsons earlier on, but he got influenced specifically from L. Ron Hubbard. So he met L. Ron Hubbard. So Jack Parsons was really interested in sci-fi, so he used to go to these sci-fi readings and book readings. And so he ran into L. Ron Hubbard. Eventually, L. Ron Hubbard became his scribe, even though he wasn't fully initiated into Thelema. And Jack was bringing him in. Aleister Crowley at the time warned Jack that this man was not to be trusted and that there was something wrong with him. Come to find out, most likely L. Ron Hubbard actually was an intelligent agent and actually worked for even more sophisticated institutions, that of the dark occult. And his job was most likely to infiltrate Thelema and create discord and destroy it from within, in which that is actually kind of what happened at that point. There's a lot of conspiracies, but there's also a lot of fact that took place, such as L. Ron Hubbard actually conning Jack and stealing a bunch of money and stealing his boat and taking off. And then Jack chased him, across the country, and it eventually, got his boat back. And then eventually L. Ron Hubbard, and then they parted for good reason, obviously. Unfortunately, Jack didn't recognize the snake in the grass, this, the venomous cobra, which some people understand that and some people won't, in the grass. And he realized too late, and at that point he had lost everything, and then eventually he died, obviously, from those mysterious circumstances. L. Ron Hubbard went on to create Scientology. So it's very important to understand that there was an agenda here, a motive to create discord and to dismantle a tradition that was actually becoming a threat amongst the higher echelons of the dark occult. And when people really study secret societies, you'll start to see that it's not all one thing. It's not all bad. You're going to see that there's wars taking place within these secret societies between the light occultists, those who are trying to preserve the actual esoteric sacred knowledge, and those who are trying to use that knowledge and pervert it and use it for gaining more power and manipulating people and infiltrating anything that could be a threat to their systems of control. And that includes the system of government. So, Thelema got recognized by the OTO. Eventually, there's a lot of history you can get into about Thelema. And if you look into the wars within the lodges, you'll realize this. And it's the same thing that takes place within the OTO and Thelema. It's not just all negative. And there are a lot of people who attempt to clean up the lodges, and I respect them for trying to do so. I think we need more people to do that. And that's the same with Thelema. And this is also part of the goal here, is to alleviate some of that stigma, because what is being preserved in this model, in this specific version of a mystery school, is actually very ancient and advanced Egyptian rites, specifically Comedian, that helps to reconnect human origins. It is unfortunately romanticized and taken into areas which I personally tend to steer away from, but that's the individual's role in this, is to understand what is the vital sacred knowledge that's of use and what is not. And that's your personal responsibility to do that. And one final thing I'd like to say on that's why I chose the color red for the theme of this presentation, because it represents the fire, the spirit of fire, protection, and unity. And also it is an implement that can be used for defense, to bring light into darkness. That's also why Babylon is red at the edge of the abyss, because she's bringing light to the darkness, which ultimately represents you bringing that light. These are archetypes. These are symbolic archetypes of ourselves and models for understanding who we really are and what our telos is, what our true purpose is here. There's a lot to be said about alchemy without getting into an hour-long breakdown of all the origins of alchemy and all the philosophical connotations of alchemy. I decided to bring in an important parallel to the process of the great work and that process within Thelema. And that is specifically the trinity of the great work, the magnum opus. Now, in some of the traditions of alchemy, you'll find that it's actually 4 phases rather than 3 phases to successfully complete the great work in alchemical, the alchemical model. That 3rd phase ends up being negated and then added in a lot of the alchemical manuscripts. It gets a little complicated with that. But I preferably like to use the Trinity. I have talked about the 4 phase of alchemy, and it is important to understand that. Here I am correlating it to the 3 phase, the 3 phases of the magnum opus. The first phase is Negredo, which means the blackening. This is putrefaction, decay, dissolution. And then the Thelemic journey. This is the ordeal of the abyss, the beginning of the process of total dissolution of the constructed false self, which is the confrontation with Quran Zan, which represents dispersion, illusion, and fragmentation. So this demon Quran, as stated before, represents your shadow. It represents your mirrored demon self. So the second stage of this is albedo, which represents the whitening. This represents purification. So coming from putrefaction into purification, and illumination through communion with your holy guardian angel. Purification under the guidance of the holy guardian angel through full surrender into the cup of Babylon. So this is the phase, this is the second degree in Freemasonry. And there's a reason why it's the 3 degrees are crucial, to understand. And that's why I also like using the trinity of the alchemical work rather than the 4-phase alchemical work. The 4th phase, which is why I wanted to bring this to the table in the first place, is rubedo, which means the reddening, which is the passing through the gate of Babylon and the full actualization of true will through the conscious internal union of the individual, representing the accumulation of the process, the creation of the philosopher's stone. So that's why the philosopher's stone is red. It is the reddening. And the total fusion of spirit and matter, symbolized by the phoenix in alchemical manuscripts and art, the red king, or a red cross, or a red rose, which also correlates to Rosicrucianism. Sometimes other red flowers, though. So as you see here on the right, I have a really good image of this, which is Negredo, representing the wandering man through the abyss and confrontation of Quran. You see Quran in the background there, and then moving up into albedo, where you gain knowledge and conversation of the holy guardian angel, and then moving on up into rubedo, which is the crossing of the abyss and the unity, which represents the crossing of the abyss and union with Babylon. And I like this image. I thought it was very direct to what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to show you a few things in gematria. One thing mainly is about the number 93, which is very, very prevalent in Thelema. A lot of people know about this number. In fact, they even go as far as to use it as a greeting and as a genuine goodbye to people at a party. So sometimes you'll hear people say 93, or you'll even see 93 over 93. And in fact, a fraction of 93 over 93 means unity. It means oneness, but it's a respect thing between those who understand what this number actually means. So what is gematria? First of all, gematria is a form of occult numerology, the practice of assigning numerical values to words and letters, then using those values to ascribe or reveal a hidden deeper meaning. So take this number, right? 777. And so if we reduce that down, right? 7 times 3 is 21. What do you get? You get 3 when you reduce 21 down. That's how gematria works. So you're gonna add 7 plus 7 plus 7, then you're gonna get 21. Then you're gonna add 2 plus 1. You're gonna get 3. Okay, and 3 represents what? Man in unity consciousness, the Trinity, the triad, right? This represents thoughts, emotions, and actions. It represents raised, harmony, and actualized. Okay? So if we look at this number 666, which is very prevalent in our culture, has been demonized very much, and there's a reason for this. Why is the number 666 always associated with Satanism? Why is this the number of the beast, etc.? Well, what do you get when you add 666 together? You get 9. And this means man in base consciousness or beast consciousness. In fact, I think that's a a dis, a pejorative towards beast, meaning animals. I always say that a man or a human who acts as an animal does is less than an animal because at least the animals know their place in nature. So if you're in beast consciousness, you're less than animal. You are far less than a beast because at least animals know their place in consciousness or in nature itself. So what does this mean? Well, this means thought, emotion, and action lowered, disharmony, and unactualized, right? So the Trinity is unactualized. And this is where we get 93 from. Okay, we're gonna look more at this 93. All right. Now let's look at the name Babylon and Choronzon. And in gematria, whenever you get the same number, it means the same thing. It means like as long as the attributes continue to line up synchronistically or, however you want to look at it, synchromistically, there could be a little bit of both there. But in Thelema, the number of Babylon is 156. There's many different ciphers and many different ways to get to this number 156 for Babylon, which is the supernal mother. But if you translate it into Hebrew and use a Hebrew cipher for this name, what you'll get is 156. And when you add 156, you're going to get what? You're going to get 12. Okay. And then when you add 1 plus 2, what are you going to get? You're going to get 3. That's kind of interesting. We just had 3, right? Okay, let's look at Choronzon, the dweller in the abyss. Same thing, same method, using the Hebrew word, right? And the Hebrew cipher. And 333 is associated to Choronzon if you look it up, okay? What do you get when you reduce it? You get 9. Here we go again, 93, right? All right. So really, Choronzon and Babylon equal 93. So numerologically and in gematria, Choronzon and Babylon together equal 93. And what does 9 stand for? It stands for lower consciousness, carnal desires, unraised spirit, spirit in the coffin, right? It stands for the ego. It really just stands for the ego and egoism. Because when you add 9 into anything, you always come back to it, whatever you're adding into it. If you multiply it, it's the same thing, ad infinitum. You always come back to 9. 9 is equivalent to a 0 when we put it into any symbolic equation, okay? It is literally equivalent to 0, which is interesting because guess what? If you add 9 plus 3, what do you get? You get 12. Oh, there's that number again. And then what do you get again? 3. You come back to 3. Unity consciousness, right? Kind of interesting. Let's look at something else. So the number 93 is an amazingly sacred number. Really, it's just 3. And then let's take a look at the other aspects. So you have will, we have love. Agape is the Greek word for universal love. That's what that word means, which is not to be confused with eros or philos, okay? So it's not to be confused with those, familiar and family love and, other forms of love. We're talking about universal love, the highest form of love that an intelligent being can have, okay? When you reduce it down in Greek, you're going to also get 93. They're equivalent. They're the same. They equal the same thing. The true will is agape, okay? And agape is the true will. This is why love is the law. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. That's why that statement resonates so well. So this is 93, which ultimately is just 3, the Trinity. And really the Trinity is freedom, love, and law. That's what it really is. And in fact, instead of using the word freedom, you could do all 3 L's. You could do liberty, love, and law, right? That's what it is. It's the Trinity of the Godhead. Because God is love, God is liberty and freedom, and God is law, or truth itself. There is no higher God than truth, period. Now we see that not only Thelema and Agape reduces to 93, Babylon and Choronzon together reduce to 93, which ultimately is just 3. It's just Babylon. That's all it really is. It's just 3. It's just the Trinity. And an interesting take, which is extremely important. I have this quote pulled up here from the book, Liber All, 122. Now therefore I am known to ye by my name, Nuit, and to him a secret name, which I give to him when at last he knoweth me. Now this has perplexed many occultists for a long time. You know who Nuit is? It's Babylon. That's who it is. Babylon and Nuit are the same archetype. It's as above, so below. Babylon is in the abyss. Nuit is in the heavens. They're both sacred feminine principles. They're mirrored images of each other. So to raise oneself to be, in the presence of Nuit, to say that symbolically, you have to pass through the Babylonian ritual. Okay? It's very important to understand the way this works. A lot of people don't get it. A lot of people just don't get it. So let's get into some more gematria. So in Thelema, there's a few other numbers that we need to pay attention to. Actually, we're going to continue on gematria for a minute. One of the numbers is 418, which is the book, the vision, and the voice, which I've mentioned before already, which is Liber 418. This number gets associated to the word, which was an adaptation of the word abracadabra, but this word is spelled with an H instead of a C, so it's abrahadabra, which means the word of the Aeon of Horus, which signifies manifestation and the completion of the great work. It is commonly rendered as I create as I speak, expressing the union of will, word, logos, and realized action. So this is crucial to understand, especially when it comes to the logos. So go back to that and look into the logos when you start to really correlate what the logos is and understand how abrahadabra and abracadabra are both not only occult words, which are very significant to an occultist, but also preserve within it a metaphysical claim about the universe. And that claim is that there is telos again, there is a divine mind, and that the higher order of logos needs to be unified with the individual's use of that internal expression of that same principle of logos. So back in the early 1900s, I believe it was around the 1920s, there was this old saying, 23 skidoo. Not sure if a lot of you are familiar with it. Maybe you are. Now, this meant to depart while departure is still possible, withdraw from the conditioned thought structure in which you have been comfortably confined, exit the cognitive enclosure, the self-reinforced architecture of the mind, and reclaim sovereignty over perception. Now, that's the occult meaning of this, obviously. But in the culture, what it meant was like if you were at a party or hanging out in a social situation, you're like, 23 skidoo, got to get the hell out of here when the time is right. 23 is a very significant number in the occult. It does reduce down to 5, which does have a lot to do with the Osirian ritual and the Osiris mythos. But also you have the Jim Carrey movie 23, and it is a movie that does depict an individual trying to get out of a very dark spot. Now, another number we find in Thelema is 77. We're going to see that number later on. 77 out of 777, 777 being the number of true good luck. So if you just look at any casino or slot machine or, lottery ticket or anything like this, you'll see that the lucky number is 7. And oftentimes it's 3 sevens, right? Like in a slot machine. So this would be 14 out of 21, okay, which is 2/3. And 2/3 equals 0.666 infinitely. So it represents sorcery, intellect united with egoic will, but lacking true care. It stands one short of 78, the number of the tarot, and also the number of the diatonic scale. It's also the number of the mysteries. So the 7 and 8 are extremely crucial to understand. So whenever you look at these 7 hermetic principles, some researchers such as Mark Passio adds the 8 hidden principle, which is the 78, which also is the model of the tarot. The number of the cards in the tarot symbolizing incompletion, power without full integration. So this 2/3 of 777 is falling short. Now, we're going to see some interesting things about this here shortly. So I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with the I Ching, but I hope that you are. And if not, you should be. I read and played around with the I Ching very early on, actually, before I even started before I ever even came across Mark Passio's work, in fact. So 418 in the I Ching, which is also known as the Book of Changes, is very interesting. So the line count behind the symbols, each stage is built from lines. And so if you add up all these things here, you have the yin yang, which means 2 lines, the 4 images, which is 4 times 2, which is 8. The 8 trigrams, which is 8 times 3 lines, which equals 24. And then the 64 hexagrams. A lot of people know the I Ching for the 64 hexagrams, which is 64 times 6 lines. So these lines are behind these symbols. That's what this means, which equals 384. You add all that together, what do you get? You get 418. Kind of interesting, huh? Now, you also get the number 78. The formation unfolds as a geometric expansion of polarity. So you have yin, which is 2. So if you do this with just the symbols, you get 2, 4, 8, and 64, and you add all that together and you'll get 78, which is the tarot. So the I Ching is just a different model of the tarot. So in gematria, as I stated before, whenever you get the same number, usually it's representing the same thing, but the important part is to find out whether the attributes of that thing, even though you get the parallel numbers that match up, you need to make sure that the attributes of what you're corresponding to together have the same causation and the same attributes to each other. So it's not just because the numbers line up, it just happens to be synchronistically that way. And it does have a phenomenon of patterns of symbolism within the psyche and patterns of symbolism within the universe and the cosmic order. So when you break this down, if you break down 418, you get 13. And then you break that down and you reduce it, you get 4. If you break down 78, you get 15. And then when you break that down, you get 6. Oh, there's 64 again. The 64 hexagrams. And then when you break that down, you get 1, unity. So the I Ching plus tarot, or abrahadabra, the 418, Liber Oz, plus tarot equals unity. So it equals the 1. We're going to take a look at this 1 a little bit more too here in a minute. So let's take a look at a couple other numbers here. We have 103, 44, and 84. So 103 represents the number of sorcery in gematria. Interesting, isn't it? So whenever you break it down in simple gematria, it's 19, 15, 18, 3, 5, 18, 25, which equals 103 whenever you would add all those numbers together. Whenever you reduce that, you get 4. This represents half of 8. So it's half power because the 8 is the symbol of magic. We're going to get to that. This represents materialism, the 4 elemental powers. This also represents the lack of spirit in a certain context. So it represents lower order and will, and can be symbolized by a square without a center point. That's not to demonize the square. Remember, this is just a context of the representation of a certain frame of its meaning. So let's take a look at the word magic with a K and without a K. So we get 44. So it's 13, 1, 7, 9, 3, which equals 33. Okay. Right there, you have the 33, the age of enlightenment, very symbolic number. But if you add the K, K is the number 11. And then you get 44. And what is 44 reduced to? 8. So you see, sorcery is half of 8. K is the number 11, which represents the 2 pillars. K is also the Ka, which is important in the Egyptian tradition that corresponds to the soul, just like the Ba corresponds to the personality in the Egyptian tradition. So magic plus K equals infinite mind and higher order and will, which is the infinity symbol, the 8, right? So magic and sorcery are equivalent. That's what that symbol there means. So magic without a K and sorcery are equivalent, okay, to 9 and the number of the beast. So when we look at this, 4 divided by 6 is what again? 0.66, a repeating decimal. That's what we just saw before with the repeating decimal. So if you take 4, the reduction of sorcery, and then you take 6, the reduction of magic without the K, the 11, which is the reduction of 33 down to 6, and you divide it, what do you get? You get this repeating decimal of 666. This is exactly the same as the 2/3 in fraction form, which equals ego and fragmentation of the self. Very intriguing when we're looking at this. Now let's look at a couple other numbers. Now we have all this. Now we're going to put it all together, right? We're going to look at a few things here. The number 84, right? So 8, the number of magic with a K. 4, the number of sorcery, right? And we're going to look at this. So we talked about magic and sorcery earlier. We have the number 93, which is equivalent to the number 84, which is also equivalent to the number 777, which is raised spirit. And one way we can know this is because 9 plus 3 equals 12, which then reduces down to 3. 8 plus 4 equals 12, which reduces down to 3. 7 plus 7 equals 21, which reduces down to 3. Again, love is the law, love under will. These are all equivalent to each other in this occult gematria. So the 9 is the ego, right? The 4 is the ego. Our job is to raise the 9 into the 3. Our job is to raise the 4 into the 8. You see? So it's very important to understand this when it comes to this. Now, you can continue this on. You can continue to do this work. It's amazing what you can bring out of this. And I'm not saying that this is the end all of this gematria. There's a lot more, and there's a lot of different things that can be correlated here. This is just the things that came to me as I studied this tradition. Now, let's take a look at some other stuff here. We have the number 66. So this corresponds to the word freedom. Okay, so whenever you do the gematria of freedom, 6 plus 18 plus 5 plus 5 plus 4 plus 15 plus 13 equals 66. Interesting, right? Again, freedom in gematria symbolizes balance, sovereignty, expressed through creative will. It implies that real freedom emerges, and that should be a capital will. My apologies for that. It implies that real freedom emerges when the individual harmonizes opposing forces. 6 plus 6 are the opposing forces, and channels them into a constructive manifestation. What's 6 plus 6? It's 12. Back to 3 again. That's interesting. So we did will in thelema in the Greek gematria, the simple gematria. But let's look at it in English, or true will, that is. So we get 120 with the phrase true will in gematria. So true is 20 plus 18 plus 21 plus 5, which equals 64. Again, the hexagrams, right? The 64 hexagrams. And will is 23 plus 9 plus 12 plus 12 equals 56. Okay. And then when you add those two numbers together, you get 120. So true will, which then reduces down to 3. Again, the same thing, right? We're seeing this similar pattern here unfold. 3, the true will, is the same as freedom, which ultimately is the same as magic. So let's take a look at another word here and number. So the number is 46. The word is liber, which means book, which is the origins of the word library, and liberty. So it means free, and it also means book. So liber designates a book as a magical instrument of instruction to liberation and freedom. To be free, you must read. This is what the ancients understood. That's why they had the same word for book and to read as to be free. Okay, because education, higher mental faculties, to be knowledgeable makes you fit to get yourself out of bondage, to get yourself out of slavery. And so when we reduce this into simple gematria, liber reduces to 12 plus 9 plus 2 plus 5 plus 18, which equals 46, which then gets reduced down to 1. Again, unity, the one and the many, which takes me to the next section, which 3 and 1, the Trinity represents balance. It represents unified consciousness, thought, emotion, and action. And what I just displayed through gematria is that the true will, the lema, agape, freedom, real magic with a K, is all equivalently unity consciousness. It is the Trinity. It is the correct higher order of logos. It is the higher order of cosmic law and natural law. They are all fundamentally related to each other. That is the crucial part of this. So the 3 in theosophical and philosophical thought and history represents many different things, but one of the concepts is the one and the many. The one becomes the many without ceasing to be the one. So if anybody's really versed in theology or even just esoteric theology in general, I mean, you could look at the Eastern Orthodox versions of this with their Trinity, which they happen to debate that's their origins and it doesn't go back to the Egyptian traditions and you can't find any Trinity earlier than that, and it's all bull crap. But the point is to understand that this concept of the one and the many is preserved in this, and it completely correlates with the structure, formulation of the occult breakdowns of the gematria for these concepts. So the principle underneath, that's what we're talking about. The 1 and the 3, the principle. We're talking about the unity, the self, the sovereignty, the single point, the source, causation. We're talking about the point within the circle. We're talking about activation, will, Horus, the crown child. We're talking about thought, emotion, and action. We're talking about grammar, logic, rhetoric. We're talking about many different things. And what did we just see? all that is preserved in these simple symbols and numerologically consistent for this tradition. I hope I explained that well. There's a lot more to it, but we're going to move on. So in Thelema takes a lot from Eastern traditions. There's this book I read, Tantra Thelema by Sam Webster. Very great book. Tantra is an ancient esoteric Indian spiritual tradition that began developing around the 5th and 6th century CE, probably goes way further back than that. First within the Shaivite and the Shakta streams of Hinduism. And you'll see that Thelema takes a lot from Eastern traditions, specifically Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and later profoundly shaping Vajrayana Buddhism, as well as influencing Jain or Jainism and other ascetic traditions. The word Tantra comes from the Sanskrit root tan or tan, meaning to stretch, expand, or weave, suggesting a structured system or loom that integrates diverse, sometimes unconventional methods into a unified path aimed at spiritual awakening. The aim of Tantra Thelema is the dissolution of all obstacles that hold back and bind the self from higher expressions and the alignment with true will through direct disciplined experience. It treats the body as a sacred vehicle where energy, sometimes sexual, also known as orgone energy, is consciously circulated, transmitted, and unified with breathwork, mantra, ritual, and visualization, or the imagination, to catalyze higher states of consciousness. One of the main objects is the integration of spirit and matter. Again, you see this repetitive nature of all these models, of all these methods, dissolving the profane so that the ordinary life itself becomes the primary area of magical and initiatory work of the spirit, meaning the work is to be done here in the physical. We have this separatist idea, this idea that, the physical doesn't matter. It does matter. It's not just about freeing the mind. It's about freeing the body as well. And we have to understand that the body is spiritual. The spirit is existing at the same place and same time and same space as the material. People don't understand this. The schism that we have of separating the spiritual and the physical is part of the problem. We have to have this balance of these two principles within ourselves. And the work is to be done here. This is where we need to do the work. And this is one process of doing work on ourselves. I would highly recommend anybody who's interested in yoga or meditation, if they have not studied Tantra, to look deeply into it. Now again, very controversial. Sex magic. And I wasn't going to bring this to the table, but I thought, why not? We should just throw it in here just to kind of, get it on the table and get it out in the open and deal with it, right? So in thelemic sex magic, in thelemic sex, oh my God. In thelemic sex magic, the sacred lies in the conscious and deliberate use of sexual practice to align with true will. Serving as a transformative force and process for transcendence, the practice of orgasmic or orgone energy release is harnessed as a tool of illumination and altered states of consciousness rather than just indulgence or pure hedonism. The profane occurs when sexual magic is misused by the ego, disconnected from higher purpose, or consumed by lust and attachment, and thus becomes a tool of domination, manipulation, and mere material gratification, binding the practitioner to ego desire rather than liberating them. Many dark Thelemites use this method as a manipulation to serve their egoic will, mainly to manipulate the sacred feminine into submitting wrongfully to this sort of process. However, just because the knowledge of this is used for dark purposes does not mean it cannot be used for positive things either. The power of sex depends entirely on the level of consciousness, intent, and acts of both practitioners. However, sex magic is not required for the great work or the spiritual path. This is not even required for Thelema. You don't have to engage in any of the sex practice if you're part of Thelema. And I'm not part of Thelema. You know, I am. Some people have accused me of being not only a Freemason, but also being involved with Thelema. I am not. I have no oaths to any lodge. I have no oaths to the OTO. I am not a part of any secret society or clandestine society at all. My oath is to truth itself. That's it. That's where my oath lies. To the higher order. You know, that's it. The real lodge. So now let's look at this. Crucial, very crucial to understand. What is the law? I think it's important to recognize what I mean when I say law. Now, there's many different sources for this word. This is the best source that I have found. You can trace it into the Latin language of lex and take it back that way. But this etymology tends to align with what I feel to be more of the original concepts, the original idea of law, and the way that I tend to use it. And a lot of people in the natural law community use it this way as well. The word law comes from the Old English lagu, which derives from the Old Norse lag, which derives from the Old Norse lag. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce that or not. And it means that which is laid down, that which is fixed or set in place. It's also a little cosmically Freemasonic when you think about it. Law, by its very nature, refers to something that is non-man-made. Let me repeat that again, just for those who don't get this. Law, by its very nature, refers to something that is non-man-made and firmly set in place, established, ordered, and binding. This means principles that are built, laid down, into the fabric of reality itself, fixed, immutable, inherent, and eternal conditions that govern the consequences of effects, whether one believes in them or not. And a good example of this is just cause and effect. Every cause has its effect. Every effect has its cause. Everything happens according to law. Chance is but a name for law not recognized. There are many planes of causation, but nothing escapes the law. Very crucial to understand. And I appreciate that Mark used the lower C causation there to represent many planes. Man is not the lawmaker. That's the biggest lesson. That's it, folks. That's all we need to say. Man is not the lawmaker. Our job is to live in harmony with the laws of the universe, not the laws of man. Now, man's law can be in harmony with natural law. It's true. But it is simply an imitation and a proxy for something that is inherent in nature, that is discoverable through the correct use of the logos. Absolutely. It is discoverable through the scientific method, and you can discover it on your own. You don't need authorities to teach you this. This is something you can go out every day and observe, put your hypothesis forward, observe, test, repeat over and over, and watch the results unfold. Okay? Vital to understand. So what is this law? Well, I already said that law is love, right? And love is the law. But let's look at it in natural law. What is natural law? Natural law is a science of morality that can directly be observed, tested, and repeated in reality. Scientific method. Again, the evidence of the existence of natural law is a resultant state, meaning consequences, of existence which an individual and humanity receives as a direct result of our aggregate behavior, the condition itself, what we get when we do certain actions, right? We put out an order into the universe, and then we are served that order back, right? It's a mirror image of what we're putting out there. And we really see this at the aggregate level of humanity. But we can see it on the micro level too. It's not that you can't see it on that level. Natural law is the governing dynamic for the consequences of the behaviors from beings with the capacity to understand the difference between moral and immoral actions. Natural law is the inherent moral principles in nature that are discoverable through the correct use of reason, being logos, the nous, which is the heart-based consciousness and the connection to God, and intuition, which are universal and immutable. So if there is a law of freedom, I've said this over and over, and many presenters here have been stating the same thing, which is amazing. The law of freedom has a quantifiable effect. Aggregate freedom is directly proportional to aggregate morality. We collectively reap the results of the behaviors we collectively sow. So as we do it more and more and more, it's more likely to be done upon you. As we set that precedence for violence and moral relativity in a social group, more likely you're going to have that same condition happen onto you. And this is also just called karma. And a lot of people don't realize this. People think karma is like this punishing force. It's not a punishing force. It is literally just cause and effect. We do this action, this is the effect we get. And people disconnect the suffering that they receive from it. So, for example, even on the most like basic level of a wrong, like a thief who stole your Xbox or something, right? Stole money from you. The thief doesn't recognize that the harm that is collectively building because of that kind of action also comes back onto them. And that just the action on the microcosmic level is a reflection of their own suffering. That suffering they're causing onto somebody else is a reflection of the suffering that they're in. And they're magnifying it and amplifying it on an individual level, collectively, right? Boom, boom, boom. It keeps going. So if you have a whole community and they all are like, oh, theft's, like it's okay to steal from this guy, but this guy's not allowed to steal from me, right? Well, you're going to get stolen from anyways. That's just how it works. If everybody has that same mindset, that's what's going to happen. That's why we have to change the mind to change the condition, to change the causality. Now, this is the thing that I came up with, which I really enjoyed putting work into. This is a regraph of Marx's natural law expressions, but in a thalamic form. So we have the expressions, which are positive and negative, which go vertical. They don't go crisscross or other ways. This is vertical. So the generative expression, which is the initiation of creation, right? What we're using to create with. Agape or thelema. So love and will, right? Are we using love and will? This is the radiant and expansive energy of consciousness. Syntropy, the unifying, ordering force of nature. Spirit, true source, and true will. And in fact, this is the spark of the star self. Remember, we're all a star. So this is the spark of a star self. Well, what happens if we have the opposite, the negative expression of that? If we start with the polar opposite of love and will, this would be things like fear, apathy, laziness, cowardness, right? So if we start with that, the contracting force of unconsciousness, it's not conscious, right? We have entropy, the chaotic force of nature, the shadow self. This is what we're going to get. We're going to get more of this, that we're going to have this negative expression of shadow self, the lower ego, reactive currents of illusion, unconscious energy that binds us, that holds us back and holds back the star self. Okay. Now the initiating expression, right? So after we start with this fundamental source energy, the initial thing that comes from that, the invocation of knowledge, contact with the HGA or lack thereof. So this is the table of knowledge. This is the next step. The pursuit and acceptance of truth. Correct orientation. That's very important. Piercing the veils of illusion to commune with the holy guardian angel. the inner spark that ignites the work. This is the blast off, the initial spark that gets it going, right? Opposing that, if we go down the path of fear and apathy, we end up with ignorance, the willful rejection of truth, self-deception, disorientation. We have no orientation. We don't know our purpose and meaning here in nature. Denial of the true will. And this is the darkness that veils and distorts the star self, so we can't see who we truly are anymore. So then we have the internal expression, the star, microcosmic monarchy, or lack thereof. Monarchy means one ruler. So this, if you continue down this path, you get a sovereignty and unity. And this is the crowned and throned star self inwardly. So sovereign, I'm a crowned sovereign. I'm my own internal monarch. Those words are interchangeable. And this is the brain, the logos. This is the Trinity we have in this. So we have the brain, the logos, we have the heart, the empathy, which is a connection to the holy guardian angel, and the guts, the courage. We're going to be talking about this Trinity here later. So we have courage to do. The alchemical wedding of self aligned with Nuit and Hadit, symbolically representing the sacred masculine and sacred feminine principles. So remember, I talked about the circle dot, Nuit being the circle, the sacred feminine, the womb, and then Hadit being the finite point, the self, right? The point within that circle. On the opposing side, in the negative column, if we go down that path, again, we have confusion and division, the broken crown and dethroned self. So the crown is broken, we're dethroned, we're no longer sitting in the throne. And usually what takes over in that absence of the throne is the ego sits in the throne. And this is discord, carnal desires, chaotic emotions, and delusions. The failure to cross the abyss where the star dissolves, okay? So this is all internal, right? This is the internal workings. We haven't done our shadow work. And then the star not only fades away, but then starts to dissolve away because we failed our process. And then we have the external expression, the macrocosmic impact, and the magic in the world or lack thereof. So this going down, the positive column again, we have freedom and the magnus opus. And this is moral, magical practice because we understand what the true will is. We understand what morality is, true ethics. We have voluntary cosmic reciprocity, respecting the moral will of others, resonance of the star selves, meaning in this community, if we're externally expressing this with other people, there's other people around us, we're going to resonate with each other. We're going to harmonize. And we're going to get great things from this. We're going to have liberty. We're going to be able to practice magic in the world and bring about great change, because that's what magic really is, the art of influencing change. But if we go down the other path, right, what we're going to do in the external expression is we're going to control. We're going to create slavery because of that. Not only are we going to enslave ourselves, but we're going to try to enslave others. So this is immoral, sorceric practice, the abuse or abuse of force, selfish will imposed. This is selfish will, which also uses imposed fear and ignorance upon others, right? Manipulation, Machiavellian tactics, and their sovereignty, and social dissonance of star self. So what we're going to have is a dissonance. We're not going to be in harmony with each other. And then there's the manifestation, the cosmic consequence of this process. And what it is, it's order and good. That's what that is. When we follow it all the way to the end, it's order and good. The manifestation of true will and love, the equilibrium of self and the cosmos, material and spiritual aggregate consequences harmonize with natural law. And this is what we say we want, the good, the order. If we choose the opposite, we're going to have chaos and evil. suffering, disorder, and collapse, the karmatic reflection of the lost and broken star self, material and spiritual aggregate consequences, disharmonize with natural law, what we say we don't want. So if you ask most people, they're going to say they want good things in their lives. Well, some of this knowledge is the required knowledge. This is just a different model. You can use many different models, but they all end up saying the same thing. All the mystery schools, specifically with the light orders, are saying the same thing. This is what they're saying. Get yourself in alignment. Get your actions plumb, square, and level. Get yourself plumb, square, and level in a Masonic term, right? So this is Liber Oz. And I think this sums up what the law is. This is coming right from Aleister Crowley himself. Now, I wanted to add this into this section here. Liber, remember in Gematria, reduces down to 1. And this document is 77, right? So it's Liber 77. It's Liber Oz, but it's 77. That's what that Roman numeral at the top represents, is 77. What is 1 plus 77? We're back to 78, the tarot again. So a little cryptic correlation here, because one may read this without understanding the gematria of Liber and just see the 77 and then go back to like seeing that 77 reduces down to the infinite decimal, the repeating decimal of 0.666, and then be like, oh, like this isn't a very good document to look at. However, even if it was that, I still would tell you that the principles on this document are pretty sound under natural law. But it is important to recognize that the gematria breaks down to 78. Another thing to understand is that Oz, that when we look at Oz, Oz also breaks down in simple gematria to 41. And then if we add the Oz gematria, Oz breaks down to 41. I didn't make a slide for this. This is just something that I'm bringing to the table here. And then when you reduce that, it's 5. And then you add that to 78, you get 83. And then when you add that, you get 11. 8, 9, 10, 11. And so that's that K, right? 11, the 2 pillars of Freemasonry, which reduces down to 2. And it represents, the masculine, the feminine. There's a lot to it. But again, you're back to magic with a K. You're back to the K, the Ka, which is very important. Now, interesting note here, I did a amazing presentation on the Wizard of Oz last year. And I think that presentation helped to facilitate this presentation, and I would highly recommend you go check out that presentation. It gets deep into theosophy, and there's some deep significance when it comes to the history of theosophy and this tradition, specifically with some of the connections. But the symbolism in the Wizard of Oz is rich, and it's really interesting because if you just look at the word Oz alone in gematria, it reduces to 5, which also is the number of Osiris, which is crucial to understand, but that's a whole nother topic to open up. And we just don't have time to do all that today. But just understand that it also represents the pentacle as well. It also represents the pentacle and pentagram. So the pentagram is the just the star, and then the pentacle is the circle around the star. But yes, the 5 represents the 5 elemental powers. Right, the 5th element being spirit, and the 5th element is an amazing movie as an allegory for the understanding of that process. That star, again, we were talking about the star earlier. That star, like I said, is symbolically associating to the star, the light within us, the soul, the spark, but it also correlates to the northern pole star and also all the other stars, but the northern pole star specifically, and the constellations around the northern pole star. the circumpolar constellations. But, you know, when we look at it in the tarot and when we look at it through a more Neoplatonic, version of it, we find that it represents the material plane, the work to be done here, which is interesting to me because it means that the star of the heaven, right? The connection to the divine also is here on the material plane. So it's not just about material when we see the tarot suit of the pentacle. And that's crucial because the pentacle gets correlated to the coin, which you could see in like Mario, the coin with the star on it. But it gets taken into this materialistic plane of good fortune and things like this, material fortune. But the spiritualism of it is the preservation of understanding the star of the self, the sovereign star, the silver star, and the connection to the one grand architect of the universe, which is not the pole star. I'm not saying it's the pole star. And people who think that are fucking retards, It's a representation of a principle, of a metaphysical claim about the way the universe functions, a mentalism, the first hermetic principle of mentalism. So very important to understand. The law of the strong, this is our law and the joy of the world. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Thou hast no right but to do thy will. Do that, and no other shall say nay. That's it. That is it, ladies and gentlemen. That's the right you have, is to do the true will that does not violate other people's autonomy. Every man and every woman is a star, as said before. There is no God but man. Now, a lot of people will take this as an atheistic statement. It's not. If you look at it, you see that it's the lower g, lowercase g. That's cryptic, meaning that we are creating the condition that we're receiving. We are the creators, the co-creators of what is actually taking place. We are the quote unquote God of the condition that we are receiving right now. That's what this means. And then it goes on to say, man has the right to live by his own law, to live in the way that he wills to do, to work as he will, to play as he will, to rest as he will, to die when and how he will. Notice that they're all capital W's. Man has the right to eat what he will, to drink what he will, to dwell where he will, to move as he will on the face of the earth. Man has the right to think what he will, to speak what he will, to write what he will, to draw, paint, carve, etch, mold, build as he will, to dress as he will. Man has the right to love as he will. Take your fill and will of love as ye will. When, where, and with whom ye will. And then finally, which is a very controversial statement for those who have sensitive hearts and have been socially engineered, obviously, man has the right to kill those who would thwart these rights. And then he goes on to state, the slaves shall serve. Love is the law, love under will. And what he means here by slaves shall serve means that, if you dedicate to that, that's what you're going to get. If you don't get yourself in order, you're going to be a slave. You're going to get exactly what you deserve. And yes, you heard that right. We have the right to kill those who thwart these rights. Now, I'm not advocating for you to go out and start killing people because, somebody stole $5 from you or something, right? But that right does exist, okay? And we must not ignore that. Self-defense is the oldest law in nature, as a great philosopher said. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. So when it comes to understanding rights, one thing I would like to point out is just because it's your right doesn't mean that there are not consequences for exercising a right. It is my right to, let's say, I have right here on my desk, actually, I have some coins, right? It would be well within my right to eat these coins. Some people argue this on some decent grounds, being that they consider even self-harm to be a violation of one's self, obviously. I, however, don't take that position because I think that we, as human beings, not only do I think it's just not realistic, it doesn't fall in alignment with natural law, obviously. I also take the position that we are, always exploring actions that could be self-harmful, whether that's skateboarding, riding a bike, cutting a vegetable. You might hurt yourself cutting a vegetable. Driving a car, right, could be very harmful. But specifically in sports is a great example. MMA, just because you can get hurt by doing such a sport or taking martial arts or something like this, doesn't necessarily mean that it's a violation of yourself. So we have to have the wisdom to distinguish, what self-harm would be considered a violation of oneself compared to another. So you could go back to like Socrates and him taking hemlock and ask yourself, is that a violation of himself and his principles? Now, he voluntarily and did not resist taking the hemlock, which was, him trying to embody his ideology, and embody the principles of the authoritarian system at the time. And he feared that if he did not do that, as far as what Plato accounted, that, it could be far more grave if you did not live in harmony with the law, the man-made laws, obviously, and man-made justice. So he wanted to be consistent with his ideas, which you could respect somebody as long as they're honest about it for that. Doesn't mean he was correct for doing so, but his actual ingestion of that, let's say, to take oneself out of existence, just as a more blatant, broad example of this, right? We do have that right as well, as long as it's done within a reasonable fashion, that you're making that decision in a reasonable manner. But yes, this area can get a little complicated when it comes to self-harm. I'm not trying to get into all that here. I'm just stating that just because it's harmful to yourself does not necessarily mean that you want to do it, right? It's not necessarily meaning it's a rational or reasonable method for exercising a right. So another thing that comes along with that is, just because we have the right to go and kill people for violating our rights does not mean that you are not going to receive consequences from that in reality, and also through the oppressive system. But also we have to have the wisdom to distinguish in this area what degree of force is necessary to level the playing ground to ensure your well-being if somebody is violating your right or rights, your well-being as an individual, to preserve your liberty, obviously, and autonomy, right, and your private property. So when it comes to that $5 thing, is it necessary, and is it required to kill somebody over $5? Well, it depends on the circumstance, obviously. So if somebody is holding you up on the street for $5 at gunpoint, okay, yes, you have the right to kill that person, And a lot of people take this as some kind of attachment to materialism. I've always stated this, that it's not me being attached to my material that is actually causing the problem. It's actually the thug who has the out of balance attachment to the materialism, that he's willing to risk his own life and somebody else's life to gain that material. And I think we have a backwards way of thinking about that, because we always put it on us as if we're the perpetrators of that initiation of violence. And I think that's a horrible way of looking at that. He's the one who's actually attached to the material, that he's willing to risk his own life and somebody else's life and take him to murder somebody else over $5. So yes, you have the right to put that down. If it's your child who is taking $5 from you and violating your let's say it's your teenager, obviously, at least of some age of reason and cognitive ability. Should you do that? No, but if they're threatening your life, yes, you have the right to use equal and beyond the equal force to prevent that from happening. People might not like that. Should you do that? Well, that's up for you to decide. But do you have that right? Yes, you absolutely do. Doesn't matter if it's your family member, if it's the kid that came out of you, if you birth that being into existence. Doesn't matter if it's an old guy in a wheelchair on the street. Doesn't matter, because they are the ones who are initiating that harm. So this can get, harsh for people. But let's just take it out of that framework, because I think people can understand that very simply and put it into the framework of the enforcement agents. If they continue to do what they're doing, is that something that potentially may occur? Absolutely. And I would side with those people who put down the other individuals who are initiating the abuse of force against them, aka violence. Man has the right to kill those who would thwart these rights. It is absolutely true. I think that there are other methods, though, that we should be utilizing, such as this method from this conference, education. I think this is a far more effective method than going to, a bloody war or a revolution. I've always stated this in all my work. That's not going to get us a real solution. So, but if you're in a life-threatening situation, obviously do what you need to do. I will state that, and it is well within your right to do so. And this is a quote from Jordan Peterson. He says, "A harmless man is not a good man. A good man is a very dangerous man who has it under voluntary control." And this aligns perfectly with Thelema, and it aligns perfectly with natural law as well. So true agape is the magnum opus. That could have been my whole presentation. I could have just opened with that and ended with that immediately. So true love is the great work. The magnum opus is the most sacred and arduous task of the individual's path. The great work demands the full manifestation of the true will and liberty, which will not be attained without meeting the requirements to manifest those conditions in reality. This cannot occur without casting off the mask of the false self and facing who we truly are underneath. Again, we have to cross the abyss within ourselves. We have to go into the second degree, the middle chamber. We have to meet our demon self, Karanzan, and then we have to, cross the abyss and come in contact with Babylon, and then prove to Babylon and Nuit that we have, dealt with our ego self to attain a higher degree of consciousness, right? It is the highest responsibility of every star awakened to stand as a sovereign in the face of evil, tyranny, and deception, to be the voice, the logos, right? The voice and vehicle of truth itself. The awakened knows that love is the law and that the work is the conscious manifestation of order through agape, through love, through the will, right? Remember, agape is will. Will is love. Higher case, right? The highest magic one can perform is the great work. the disciplined application of true will to transform the self and positively influence others to awaken their dormant potential, aiding them towards sovereignty, higher knowledge, and alignment with natural law. That's what we're doing here today. This conference is an example of the true will. This conference is an example of the magnum opus. The great work also is the continual refinement of the methods for this process in order to become more effective with the use of this magic. That's what magic is, to be able to influence people, again, and influence ourselves and influence the world around us, right? The elemental powers. From there, it is the highest goal to preserve that condition and pass down the sacred knowledge of the mysteries for the well-being of progeny, who we call youngsters. What does that break down to in green language? Young stars. They are the young stars. Helena Blavatsky says, "It is not by studying occultism for selfish ends, for the gratification of one's personal ambition, pride, or vanity, that one can ever reach the true goal, that of helping suffering of mankind." Again, telos, right? And this is the true goal of occultism, which is to help end and alleviate the suffering of mankind. That's what all the occult can be boiled down to end suffering. And really, it's to end slavery. And here is a quote from Jack Parsons, the book Rebels and Devils. "Freedom, like charity, begins at home. No man is worthy to fight in the cause of freedom unless he has conquered his masters. He must learn control and discipline over the disastrous passions that would lead him to folly and ruin. He must conquer inordinate vanity and anger, self-deception, fear, and inhibition." And the book that I have on this slide is not actually Rebels and Devils. It's the book that I was talking about earlier called Strange Angel. Rebels and Devils is also a good read. I never finished it, but it was vital for some of this understanding and some of this work. So as you can see, even though Jack struggled with the path, he has some wisdom here. And this statement, again, is true. And this is the process. This is the great work. We have to conquer our internal lowercase masters, being those that inhibit our ability to express the true will or commune with our holy guardian angel. And these things are ego, self-deception, fear, the contracting forces of consciousness, as I showed before. And as a final closing statement, I have taken Aleister Crowley's statement and rephrased it and added to it. This is the work of magic. Every man, every woman, and every child is a star, a radiant sovereign being of the divine. Each holds the power to know themselves, to act in will, and to cast light into the darkness of ignorance. Do not falter on the path, or you will suffer the devouring jaws of Apophis. Apophis is the great beast in the abyss of the Duat, and the chaotic beasts of the Egyptian pantheon and cosmological understanding, also known as Apep. And that's it, folks. So I hope you enjoyed and you gained great value from this. I hope I revealed some new things about Thelema, and I hope it perks your interest into diving deeper into such traditions, such occult traditions.